Guys, it has been some time since I have been on here, but I am so excited to share that I am back. I have literally relocated countries. That's why you haven't seen me in so long, but enough about that. I can share more in another video. Let's get into tonight's story. Tonight's tale was sent in from an anonymous sender, and it tells the scary story of what happened to their cousin on a family trip to Samoa. So this person and their cousin were staying out in their village, which is like right out in the bush, and it's very barren there. No street lights, no neighbors, just trees and complete darkness. So there was about 6 of them that were staying in that house, and at night they all slept in the lounge. Like, they put all their mattresses there together because no one likes sleeping in this old house alone. Their uncle, like literally on the first night, told them one rule: if you hear your name being called out, whatever you do, do not answer to it. Of course, they laughed and just thought that their uncle was trying to scare them, but they were about to find out why that uncle only said that one rule. Later on that night, it went completely silent. Like, I'm talking zero noise. There was no wind, no insects, like nothing. You couldn't hear anything. Sometime after midnight, their cousin woke up and could hear someone calling his name in the distance. He actually thought it was one of the other cousins, like just pranking him and messing around, so he just kept his eyes closed. But then the voice was calling him again, and now it was telling him to come closer. When he sat up, he looked around and realized everyone was asleep, but the voice was echoing from outside the house. Now, here is a crazy part of the story. The voice that he could hear sounded exactly like his mother, who had passed away a few years before. Not too long after that, the voice started calling him and saying, "I need help," just like his mother would. So of course, instinctively, he got up. He walked very slowly towards the door, making sure that he didn't wake up anyone. He didn't even alert them that there was a voice calling out to him. But just as he was about to reach for the door handle, his uncle shouted out to him and said, "Don't open that door." The cousin froze and completely went silent. But now the uncle and the cousin are awake together, and sure enough, they hear the voice again. But this time it doesn't sound like his mum. It sounds very deep and dark. The uncle was very quick to grab the cousin and pull him away from that door, making sure that the voice wasn't luring him outside. The next morning though, guys, right? So obviously no one slept after that happened. I mean, I wouldn't be able to sleep for the rest of my life. But the next morning, they get up to go and look outside. What do they find? They find footprints outside the door. And they don't just find one set of footprints, they find multiple set of footprints facing the house, as if whatever it was had been waiting and standing there the entire night. Now, I know that you may have heard stories about mimics or watch movies about mimics, but let me tell you people, they are real. Every culture has their stories of mimics. So if you hear someone calling out to you at night, whether it's a mimic or who knows, do not answer that call.
Hello and welcome back to a series of spooky stories, The Haunted Tea Spill. This series is brought to you by all things spooky and ungodly amounts of paranormal activity. Happy Easter! Back to the handy dandy necklace. It's cute and I literally wear it all the time. It's down here if you want it. Now onto the story. The figure above me. Off to a great start. My name is Sanaya and this happened when I was 14. I'm 18 now, and no matter how much time passes, it still sits in the back of my mind like it never really ended. I grew up in Illinois with both my parents until they divorced. My dad moved to Ohio for work and my mom stayed in Illinois. When COVID hit and school went online, my mom sent me and my sister to stay with our dad for a few months. He had just moved into this brick house. 3 bedrooms upstairs, living room and a kitchen downstairs. My room was directly above the living room. At first, it just felt off. When me and my sister were home alone, we would hear footsteps downstairs, slow and heavy, like someone was pacing. Things would fall, doors would open and then shut. Every single time we checked, nothing was there. No open doors, nothing out of place, just silence, like the house was pretending nothing happened. But I've always been too sensitive to things that can't be seen, and that house, it felt like it was watching us. The house? One night, I was on a Zoom call with my friends. I was exhausted, but they kept talking, laughing, yelling, so I stayed on. Oh, there's nothing worse. My social battery is deceased. Get me the fuck off here. But I feel bad, so I can't. You know what I mean? The worst. My room was set up in a way that I'll never forget. Both doors were behind me on the same wall, closet to the right, bedroom door to the left. Locked. My computer screen was the only light in the room, and it lit up everything behind me. Eventually, I muted my mic so I could fall asleep without them bothering me. That's when it happened. While I was asleep, all 4 of my friends saw the same thing. A tall, black figure slowly appeared behind me. Not walking in, not opening the door, just there, standing over me, watching me. They said it didn't move at first. Okay. They just sat there and watched it. They just sat there and watched it happen. They didn't like one screen record, one call fucking 911, and then hang up the phone with you and try and call you over and over again until you answered to wake the fuck up. You know what I mean? It just stood there like it had been there longer than they realized, like it was already in the room before they noticed it. Minutes passed. Then they started screaming my name. Minutes passed, and then they started screaming your name? I don't like that. Trying to wake me up, but I had muted my mic. I couldn't hear them. I didn't move. And the whole time, it stayed right there. They said the moment they started yelling louder, the figure reacted. It slowly stepped back and sank into the wall behind me. Not like a person walking away, but like it was never solid to begin with. Oh, call a priest. Call the ambulance. Call a fire truck. Call Scooby-Doo. Call ghost hunters. Call someone. You got 4 friends on the fucking phone and not one of them called for help. If they noticed that you weren't answering and then it was gone. All 4 of them saw it, the same height, the same shape, the same movement. My friends told me the next morning and I knew that they were serious because they were terrified like they had seen something out of a horror movie. Because they had and all they did was scream. After that night, I couldn't sleep the same. I felt like something had been standing over me before, and I just never knew. Yeah, sounds about right. So I started asking questions about the house. I wish I didn't. 2 years before we moved in, a woman died in a fire in the living room, right below my room. That used to be her room, the one I was sleeping in. Oh my God. Her daughter said that she struggled with alcoholism, severe addictions, and that she was often alone. She died a violent death in that house. What if she didn't struggle with any of those things until she moved into that house in that very same room and she started experiencing those really creepy things that led her to that? And then, oh my God. My dad had no idea of this, but the worst part, sometimes late at night when everything was quiet, I could still hear footsteps downstairs, slow pacing, like someone was still there, and sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night feeling like I wasn't alone, but too scared to turn around and check. That's the best decision that you could have made. Just don't even, and then skedaddle. You know what I mean? Get the fuck out of there. That's creepy. Very, very creepy. I mean, maybe the lady struggled with all of that beforehand. You know what I mean? But what if that thing that you were seeing is what caused her to struggle with those things? That can drive a person crazy. You know what I mean? Anyway, rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being least scary, creepy, spooky, 10 being the most. Very creepy, spooky. If you have a story of your own that you want to submit, you can do so on the link tree in my profile. I will see you all at the next episode. Stay spooky, friends.
I swear to God, I think Coraline is a true story because I lived part of that movie when I was 5 years old, years before it came out. So when I was about 5 years old, around 2004, my family and I lived in this small 3-bedroom apartment. So I would always sleep with my mom and dad when I was 5 years old, and I remember that their bed was like against the wall because that's always where I used to sleep. So my father would be in the middle and my mom would be on the outside of the bed, and it was a pretty large bed. So one morning I wake up and I feel conscious, right? I feel conscious, but I don't know if I was awake or not. And I remember seeing this small door on the wall, like right when I woke up, it was right next to me. But the problem is that this door wasn't normally there. The door was like this dark gray color and it was like tin and it was this run down small door. I decide that I'm gonna open the door, right? So I go over to the door, I open it up, and then I look back to see if my mom and dad are asleep. They were sound asleep. So at this point, I'm debating whether I should crawl in. Let's just say that it was dark in there, but I did decide that I was gonna crawl inside. Why? I do not know. Mind you, all this felt so real to me. I could feel everything. I could could smell the room. I could feel the cold air. Like literally, I could still feel it to this day. So I decide to stand up. Now I am scared at this point, right? I'm only 5 years old, but I am still curious. Just standing there for a second when I hear psst at the small door. So I look back, right? It's my mother. She has these pitch black eyes. I'm telling you, her eyes were so dark, it seemed shadowed. I remember she's on the outside of the door, right? So I'm looking at her from inside of this dark little place that I'm at, and she's on the outside of the door. So I'm looking at her with these dark freaking eyes, and she starts smiling at me, and the smile was so terrifying, I cannot even explain it to you. And she just slams the door shut behind me. So at this point I am terrified. I start screaming, mom, 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 mom. I'm trying to wiggle the door is not opening. I'm totally trapped in this dark place. I remember literally hyperventilating, and then I kind of just like somehow calm myself down, and I just put my hands over my face like this because I was so terrified. I just didn't want to look at anything. A few seconds go by, right? And I hear something behind me in this dark room. I hear like this whimper, like this small, quiet cry. So at this point, I'm like, no, 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 no. And I just turn my head like super slowly. And I peek through my fingers to see this small, old-fashioned bed with like this metal bed frame. It's in like the left corner of the room, right? And on top of the bed is like this glowing white blanket. Something or someone was underneath that blanket. So I know this sounds insane, but I was just a curious kid. So I walk slowly over to the bed. I reach for the blanket at that point, but before I can even grab it, 3 kids just come flying out of the blanket, like literally flying out of the blanket. And these little kids are see-through, right? So I'm panicking. I fall to the floor because it scared me so bad. So I'm looking up at them, and I can see that there is 1 little boy and 2 girls. They were clothed in like these old-fashioned clothes, and they were hovering above me saying, help me. Help me. And they start talking to me, and I'm like talking back to them at this point, but I cannot remember exactly what they were saying or what I was saying to them. I just sat there with them for like what felt like 30 minutes until finally the oldest girl that was there was like, listen, you need to go back home. You need to go. She starts leading me to the door, but I remember that I cannot go through that door. I couldn't go through it earlier, so I tell her that. I'm like, listen, I already tried to go through this door. It wouldn't open. And that's when she tells me, you can't go through life panicking. Calmly try to open the door again. So I try it, and it opens. And as I'm looking out into the room, it's extremely blurry. Like I cannot really see what's on the outside of it. But I did see my mom and dad, and they were still like sleeping on the bed. And so I turn around and I thank the girl. But at this point, I'm curious. I'm not really that scared anymore. So I ask her, like, how did you pass away? And that's when she said, we were curious just like you were. And then she floats back to the bed with the rest of the other 2 kids, and they just get under this glowing blanket. I crawled out of that place as fast as I possibly could. I go and lay down next to my dad, and I fall asleep. A few hours later, I wake up and I get out of bed, and I look over to where that door was, and it's not there anymore. So I go downstairs and I see my mom making breakfast. I acted like it never happened. I never said anything to my mom, but whether it happened to me or not is not the crazy part. This is the crazy part. Fast forward to 2009, and there's advertisements everywhere about the movie Coraline. So I watched the movie maybe 2 years later. Like I think it was like 2011-ish, I think at this point. And I tell you now, I was shocked, flabbergasted, like stunned when I saw that movie. When I saw that, I literally questioned whether I had told anybody about that story before. I questioned myself that, but I didn't. I never told anybody that story before. Now, if you watch that movie and you go to 58 minutes and you see the scene, you see exactly what I saw that night in that exact room. Those exact kids, and the mom looks so similar to my mom. It's scary. The only thing, there was no door. When I tell you, I freaked out after that movie finished. Who would believe me? Is this even real? I actually kept this to myself until right now. I've never told anybody before, ever. But I wanted to tell somebody because every time I tried, I would literally choke up. So I had to tell Kaisa, which is me, because that wasn't my story. That was a story that was sent in to me. What do you guys think about that? That is pretty wild. I will say, I've never seen the movie Coraline, but I've heard about it. I actually don't even know the plot. I know nothing about it at all. I guess I need to watch it because it's a horror film and people talk about it all the time, and I cannot believe I have not seen it. Guys, when I tell you I've been so bad, I used to love scary movies, but I'm doing spooky stories and working all the time now, so I never get a chance to like sit down and enjoy a scary movie. So I have never seen that movie, so shame on me, but I have to watch it now. I have to watch it now because that is crazy. The whole mom thing when she slams the door is so scary. I don't know how much this was, I don't know how similar this was to the exact plot of Coraline, but to what she made it sound like it was very similar, so I'm assuming it's very similar. You guys will have to tell me in the comments. But what do you guys think this was? Like, this is so strange because it's a movie, right? This is something that someone directed. And did they have the same experience as maybe she had? Or was this just a huge coincidence? Because she said those were the exact kids. So did she have a premonition of the movie? Or do those kids really exist? Like, that's wild to me. So leave all your thoughts, opinions, and suggestions in the comments, please. And also let me know if you guys like it when I tell stories in first person. I figured this one would be easiest to tell in first person, but if you like it better when I tell them the other ways, drop it in the comments. If you like it better this way, drop it in the comments. If you don't really have a preference, then you can also drop that in the comments, because I want to know going forward what you would like me to do. And sorry I haven't posted in a few days, you guys. I have been on a business trip, and that's the only reason why. So this isn't going to be something that's normal. I'm going to continue to post at regular schedule. But drop your thoughts, opinions, suggestions down below. As always, please be respectful.
What would you do if your roommate started sleepwalking at night and so you decided to start filming it, and when you watch the footage back, you realize that that's not your roommate? This is Scared with Jess, and today's story is about a woman who says that she caught on camera the exact reason why she will never live with another person again. I've shown the video to 4 people. 2 of them cried, and 1 of them left my apartment without saying anything and texted me an hour later asking me to please never send it to them. The 4th one watched it 3 times and then told me to delete it and never speak about it again. I haven't deleted it, and I don't know why. I think part of me needs proof that I didn't make this up. My roommate Danny and I had been living together for about 8 months when it started. We got along fine, split everything evenly, didn't have any real issues, but she worked early shifts, so she was usually asleep by 10 and I was the night owl. That's relevant because it means I was always awake when it started happening. That first night, I heard her get up. I thought she was going to the bathroom. It was around 2 a.m. and I heard her door open, heard her in the hallway, and then it went quiet. I got up to check because the quiet felt weird and found her standing in the kitchen facing the wall with both palms flat against it. I said her name and she didn't respond. I touched her shoulder and she turned around and walked back to her room and got into bed and never woke up. I looked it up, and the next morning, everything I read said not to startle a sleepwalker, not to make a big deal of it, and that was it. It was usually harmless. I mentioned it to her over coffee, and she had zero memory of it and seemed embarrassed, so I dropped it. But it kept happening. Every few nights, I'd hear her door and find her somewhere in the apartment, standing in the hallway or maybe sitting in the kitchen table. Once she was just in the middle of the living room with her head tilted back slightly like she was looking at the ceiling. I always guided her back to bed and she never remembered any of it. After about 2 weeks of this, I started filming it. Partly because I thought it was wild and I wanted to show her. Partly because I was starting to lose sleep over it and I think some part of me wanted documentation without fully knowing why. The first couple videos were just what I thought I'd been seeing. Her standing somewhere and me guiding her back. Weird, but nothing that made me feel sick. The third video is the one. I heard her around 3 a.m. and grabbed my phone before I even got out of bed. I turned on the flashlight and she was in the hallway, which was normal by then, but the way she was walking was wrong. It's hard to explain in a way that sounds as bad as it actually looks on the tape, but I'll try. Danny's a small person, light on her feet, moves kind of quickly in her normal life. What was in the hallway was moving slowly. Each step was deliberate in a way that felt like whatever was moving her legs was having to think about it, and her arms were slightly away from her body, and her head was down. I stayed in the doorway and I kept filming because I was frozen more than anything else. It walked to the end of the hallway and stopped. Then it turned around. She had never turned around before. She'd always just been standing somewhere and then walked back when I had guided her. She had never, not once, to turn around on her own. It stood there facing me for a second and then it raised its head. And then it looked directly at the camera. Not in my direction, not in the general vicinity of the light, at the camera, dead center into the lens. And the expression on her face was not an expression I have ever seen Danny make in the entire time I've known her. It wasn't blank the way sleepwalkers look in movies. It was focused, patient, like it had been waiting for me to come out of my room and was glad I finally did. We stood there looking at each other for what the timestamp says was 11 seconds, but felt like so much longer. Then it smiled. I shut my bedroom door and locked it and sat against it on the floor until the sun came up. I didn't hear her go back to her room, and I don't know when it happened. In the morning, Danny was completely normal. She made coffee, she asked about my plans, and then she was complaining about what she had to do for that weekend. I sat across from her and watched her face the entire time because I kept thinking about that smile and how long it took her face to do it. I didn't show her the video that day. I couldn't figure out how. 2 nights later, I woke up to my bedroom door handle turning. Not rattling, not banging, slowly turning, as far as the lock would let it go and then holding it there. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I lay there and watched the handle, and it stayed like that, turned as far as it could go for a long time. Long enough that I started wondering if I was going to have to watch it all night. Then from the other side of the door, in a voice that sounded almost like Danny, but pitched just slightly wrong, it was too low and too even, and it said, "I know you have it on your phone." I didn't sleep again that night either. I showed Danny the video the next morning, and she watched the whole thing without saying anything. When it got to the part where it looked into the camera, she made a sound I've never heard another person make. This short, sharp exhale like something had knocked the air out of her. She watched it twice more and then handed me my phone back and said she was going to her mom's for a few days. She moved out 3 weeks later. She didn't give me a reason, and I didn't push for one. I think she was just as scared of herself as I was. I've never told her about the door handle or about the voice that I heard. I've thought about it a lot, and I think maybe I'm not supposed to. Anyway, good luck sleeping tonight.
Listen to this creepy story that one of my followers sent in. She would like to remain anonymous, and she included a picture and video, which I will share towards the end. So this woman says that not too long ago, her grandparents gave her this life-sized antique doll that supposedly belonged to her great-grandparents back in Persia. She said at first it was just kind of like an old decoration to her, but she said there was just something about it that felt off. It was this uncomfortable feeling that it just did not belong in her room. So she says the first thing that happened was small enough to brush it off. She says one day her eyeshadow palette went missing, and she says she searched properly everywhere and could not find it. And then weeks later, she did end up finding it, but definitely not where it should have been. It was inside a flower vase on the shelf directly next to the doll. Like literally the flowers were removed, the palette placed inside, and then the flowers and everything else placed back inside the vase. It wasn't like messy or accidental. It was very deliberate. And then after that, things kept happening more often. Another time, she was downstairs with her mother and one of her earrings disappeared. Her mother even said that she did see her wearing both of them when she came in. She said they checked the couch, the floor, just everywhere around the area where she had been, and nothing. Okay, this gives me chills. She says later that day, she went upstairs and there sat that earring sitting on that same shelf directly next to the doll. And then it just keeps getting weirder. Her door wouldn't stay in place where she left it. Like she'd go to bed and the door would be closed and then she would wake up and now it would be slightly open. She said she thought it might be the air or something coming from the window, but even on nights when the window was closed and there was no airflow, this would happen. And it happened a lot. And then one night she wakes up at 3 a.m. on the dot and she has this really weird feeling like she was being watched. She said she didn't see anything move, nothing obvious, but her eyes just kept going to this freaking doll. She says she remembers just staring at it in the dark, trying to convince herself that she's just overthinking this. But she couldn't shake the feeling, and so she ended up turning on the light and staying awake for ages. So after that, she stopped keeping it in direct view. She turned it so it was facing more towards the wall. But that presence, that uneasy feeling always remained there. And then she said the last few things are what actually made her get rid of it finally. So she was messaging with a friend and telling him all about this, and he even made a joke, and he's kind of like, what? Do your lights flicker on and off too? And so she laughs it off and then goes to bed and everything seems normal. And then the next morning she wakes up to a clicking sound. She had mirror lights in her room and they were off when she went to bed. They were now on, and not just on, they were flickering on and off rapidly. She says that that has never happened before. And how coincidental that just when her friend says something specifically about that, then it happens. Almost like it's taunting her. So she says that same day, she now took this doll and put it in the basement. And funny enough, ever since she put it down there, everything stopped. Nothing weird has happened since. Here is a picture of this doll. Next, I'm going to show the video clip of the mirror flickering on and off. Yeah, I don't think I would have allowed that doll to stay in my room even after the first thing that happened. She asked me to share this story because she has never been a believer and it's kind of freaking her out and she doesn't understand what it might mean. So she wanted me to see what other people think. Let us know what your thoughts are in the comments. I know she'll be in there checking them out. And if you have a creepy story of your own, you gotta share it with me. And if you're new here, definitely follow for more creepy story time.
I've got a story about a ritual taking place in the middle of the woods, and the person who sent this story in says it was so disturbing that he actually called the cops to come and break it all up. And he says he works as a tower tech in Northern California, and one night around 1 a.m, he was out on a call near Blue Peak. The process of getting to the tower where he was working was already creepy in itself because he had to drive in the middle of the night up the side of a mountain where there were no streetlights and through a dense forest, and then upon getting to a small parking lot had to hike about a mile through the woods to get to this tower. This place was remote, but despite there being no lights, he wasn't creeped out because there were 3 people on his team, and upon hiking through the woods to the tower with all of their gear, they had to climb 350 feet up the tower to replace a V-chip in a radio. He and one other guy climb up the tower, and the third stays on the ground. About 250 feet up, he looks down and he can't see much besides the top of the trees, but at 350 feet he looks out and he can see the tree line bleeding into the night sky. There's a small clearing, but nothing is out of the ordinary. Everything is dark. They get to work. They're working for a little bit when out of the corner of his eye he sees a small orange flicker, and it's in that clearing that had been darker earlier, and he motions to his coworker. He's like, hey, look at that. His coworker's like, oh, there's camping spots up around here, I think. He's like, yeah, that's probably what it is. They work for a little while longer. It's like 2 a.m, and they see that this orange flicker is getting bigger and bigger, and he's like, I don't think that's a campfire. It's looking more like a bonfire. Stopped working for a minute to check it out, making sure it's not like a forest fire or something, but he said it was a clear and cold night and you could hear and see things from a long distance, and they start to hear what sounds like a low chanting. Then they see these robed shadows that are walking in circles around the fire. So they radio down to their other coworker who's still on the ground, and they're like, hey, you need to lock the tower gate. Like, there's other people out here, something weird is going on. And the guy's like, why, what's going on? And he's like, just lock the gate and come up here and you'll see what we're talking about. He locks the gate, he starts coming up, and as they're watching, more people start coming out of the woods as these initial 6 people are still circling around the fire. And these people that are coming out of the tree line are now putting stakes in the ground around the fire. As their third coworker reaches the top of the tower, they start to hear a woman screaming, and they look out and they see 2 of these robed people wrestling a woman on the ground with her hands tied, and they're fighting with her to put her up on one of these poles. And another guy comes out of the woods, and he's in a different colored robe. It's lighter colored, and he says he thinks he was some sort of leader, and he smacks her and he says, you are the forest gift tonight. And his voice is booming and it's louder than anything that makes sense. Then they bring out another woman whose hands are also tied, but she doesn't put up any kind of fight. They just put her up on another pole. The supposed leader in this lighter colored robe says, great forest, we've brought you 2 gifts tonight. And the rest of the crowd starts cheering, and then they hear this loud roar come out of the forest that shakes the tower they're standing on. He said it wasn't human, it wasn't animal. I don't know what it was, but all of us went silent. We all got chills. After the roar, the forest was dead silent. There were no bugs, no crickets. You could hear the twigs snap. And another figure walks out of the trees, and he said he had deer antlers, some sort of white mask, and it was huge, and it was looming over the fire, and the rest of the people gathered around it and started chanting in tongues. While all of that is happening, one of the guys is on the phone with 911. He's giving the location of where they're at, and he's trying to explain, and the operator's like, how many people? And they're like, it's definitely over 20. And meanwhile, Eric, the guy who sent this story, he said we had to do something in the moment. So we used our high-powered lasers to shine down to where this ritual was taking place, because meanwhile, one of the women is still struggling up on the pole. They point the lasers at the main guy, the guy in the lighter colored robe, and he notices it. He's looking all around trying to figure out where it's coming from. And then this thing, this person, this creature, whatever was standing there with the deer antlers and the mask, it roars again. And they realize that that is what the initial roar came from. After this thing roars, it retreats back into the woods from which it came, and it moved all wrong. And everybody that was around the fire started freaking out and panicking, and they were screaming to each other that the police were coming. And Eric and his coworkers climbed down as fast as they could, and they ran back toward the trucks. And as they reached the trucks, they could hear sirens in the distance, but they noticed that their trucks were covered in bloody handprints. Surrounding the truck on the ground were tons of mutilated animal parts. And they said they hopped in the trucks and they headed back. They abandoned their post for the night. And as they were headed back down the mountain, a ton of police cars were passing them going up the mountain. We're all shaken and still talking about it the next day. And so the coworker who initially called 911 called the sheriff's department the next day just to see if they could get an update. And the sheriff's department did confirm that they found 2 women, but that they didn't see anything else out of the ordinary besides some large tracks in the mud. Said they found no evidence of people in robes. Eric says he has a ton of odd stories from the job, but this was by far the scariest. Let him know what you think they were doing out there. And if you have a spooky, scary story that you think nobody would believe or that you've been too afraid to share because you feel like you'll be called crazy, send it in. We'd love to hear it.
There was one day where this guy was walking home and he noticed that a dog was following him. This dog was huge, so he was a little bit scared, but then he noticed how the dog was really sweet to him. That dog ended up following him all the way home, and this guy was like, I think I'm gonna have a pet now, and brings him into the house. A few weeks pass and he still has this dog. You know, he's really happy. The dog got used to the home. He was really happy with his new dog. So one day the guy's friend was gonna come for a visit, and the friend is a witch. When the friend comes in and sees that dog, she immediately turns to, the guy and says, hey, I need to talk to you in private. Can we go outside? He of course agrees, and when he goes outside, the friend, the witch, asks, where did you get that dog from? And he was like, well, it was following me one day and now he's my pet. The witch tells him, no, that dog is a person. That dog is a nagual. Okay, pause. I'm gonna tell you the most basic thing that I know about what a nagual is. A nagual is a person who can shapeshift into an animal. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know too much about them, but if you're watching this and you do, leave it in the comments. But there's a lot more to it. Like, people believe that the shapeshifters were born with a certain animal that they can shapeshift into. And some people believe that if you tap into it, you can shapeshift into that animal. Some people say they're evil, some people say they're protectors. Again, this is just the most basic things that I know about a nagual. She starts explaining to him how bad it was that he literally invited the nagual into his home, into like being part of his family. She warns him that that dog will eventually become your owner. Worse things are yet to come, and that he needed to be very careful. The guy went back into his house, pretended like nothing was wrong, and so did the dog. Except for there was a point where he thought that he heard that dog talk, and that is when he was like, this is definitely a nagual. Obviously, he goes to his witch friend and says, what do I do? The witch tells him that he has to take the nagual's life. And he was like, well, can you help me? And she was like, yeah, I'll help you. So they go into the house, they put the dog on a leash. The dog is still acting normal, like, he's a dog and not a nagual. And they take him to the back of the house where there is like a forest area. They ended up tying the dog to a tree, and even then the dog was still chill. Nothing was wrong. He is a dog. The dog let him tie him up to the tree, and when they tie him up, he backs up, he looks at his friend the witch and says, now what? And she says, now you end his life. He had a pew-pew with him, and he had to work himself up to do this because obviously, like, what the fuck, like, what am I doing? He walks up to the dog, puts the pew-pew towards the dog, and shoots. Nothing happened. The dog was still there, looking at them after being pew-pewed. The dog didn't even flinch. The dog was still staring at them like, yeah, like, what did you think was gonna fucking happen? He literally backed away from the dog that should have not been alive still, and looks at his friend and says, now what? And his witch friend was like, let's get out of here. They left the dog tied up to that tree and started walking away from them, just like leaving the whole situation. And it was then where they were walking away where they heard the following.
Hey, don't leave me here. Hey, come back. Don't leave me here. I'm your friend. Don't leave me here.
The witch friend looks at him and says, don't turn around. Don't look back. They went all the way home and left that dog still tied up to that tree. The following day, they decided to go back. When they went back, dog was not there. The leash was torn apart. He said that around the tree, there was like a lot of animals that had been torn apart, and says that he has not seen that dog again. He says that ever since that day when people start talking about naguales and things of that sort, he 100% believes everything that they claim and that they say. And he assures them that they are real, that what he experienced was real. So the guy telling this story says that he is not afraid to give you his full name, the exact location, and what happened, because he wants you to understand that he is not lying and that everything he's about to say is the 100% truth. His name is Suriel Espinosa. This happened in Titlaltepec, Tlaxcala. This happened in Titlaltepec, Tlaxcala. So for the past 2 years, he has been working as a security guard at a warehouse where they distribute canned food. He said that while he worked, he would always notice that there were street dogs there. So when they had like extra leftover food, they would always leave it outside for these dogs. So it became a routine for these like street dogs to come every night and he would feed them. But he says that something weird happened. These animals who would return night after night knowing that they were going to be fed, just all of a sudden stopped showing up. So that night they all ate, they had leftovers, they were going to go outside and give it to the dogs, and they saw no dogs out there. So he went about his way, did his work, and he could have sworn that he had heard that bull outside move. So he went out there to take a look and he didn't see any of the dogs. However, there was a new dog. It was a Dalmatian, and when he saw this dog, he was really worried because he explains that the dog looked very malnourished. You could see the bones, like it looked like it had been through hell and back. He started to feel really bad for this dog, and he would touch the dog. It wouldn't bite, it wouldn't like bark, it wouldn't wag its tail, and he was like, you know what, I think I need to take it home. I need to take care of this dog, and that's exactly what he did. So at home, he already had a dog named Luna, and she was a husky. When Luna the husky saw this dog come into the house, she ran outside with her tail between her legs, very much scared. He mentions how there was one time where him and his wife were sitting on the couch with the Dalmatian in front of him, and they started to talk about how the shape of the dog, like the bones, were really weird because they didn't seem like bones of a dog. It was almost human-like. Red flag, bitch, what the fuck? It was kind of in passing, but they both thought that it was really weird. So he also started to notice that he was being awoken in the middle of the night by the sounds of the front door being pushed. Like not somebody turning the knob, but like someone actually trying to push that door open. Then all of a sudden that sound changed. Another night he woke up to the sound that he was terrified of because it sounded like somebody had successfully turned that knob and opened his front door. He thought to himself, no way, no one opened that door, it's my imagination, and he went back to sleep. The next morning when he woke up, he went to the living room and noticed that his front door was wide open. At this point, he's obviously scared, he's obviously worried, he's like, what is going on? And another night comes, he's laying in bed, and he gets awoken again by the sound of that front door opening, like the knob and pushing in. This time he's like, it's not my imagination, someone has come into my house, and he sits up in complete shock and says that he hears somebody talk in the living room, and that somebody says,
finally, I was able to enter.
So now he gets up, he's really worried because he's like, someone just came into the house. His wife is asleep still next to him, and that's when he remembers that he has a machete on the back of the bed, and he grabs it. So again, he grabs the machete and decides that he's gonna go very quietly to the living room and not even alert his wife because he doesn't want to make any sound. So he starts walking towards the living room, and he's like, whatever's there, I'm just gonna attack because I don't know who it is and why they continue to come to my house. Once he finally gets to the end of the hallway where there's a light switch that would light up the entire living room, he says that what he saw continues to terrorize him even now. There in that living room couch was the Dalmatian dog sitting down upright like a human. But what scared him the most was not seeing that dog sitting upright like a human, but when he saw the dog's eyes, it didn't look like the way that he had seen them before. He said that they fully looked like human eyes. He felt when his legs like almost gave out on him because of how scared he was. And in that moment, when the Dalmatian finally looked at him, he says that the Dalmatian smiled, like an eerily scary ass smile. Seconds after that smile, he heard the loudest scream coming from behind him, and it was his wife. And that scared him even more. Like, he said that he almost had a heart attack because, again, he had left her asleep in the room. So I guess what he was seeing, his wife also saw from behind him, and he had no idea, and she just screamed really loud. He says that his wife not just screamed, but she ran to the phone and called the police. And when the Dalmatian turned to look at his wife, noticing that she picked up the phone to call the police, it started growling at her, and he knew in that moment that the Dalmatian was going to attack his wife. The second he noticed that the dog was about to leap towards his wife, he ran in front and grabbed that Dalmatian. At that point, they had bought a collar for the dog, and he grabbed that Dalmatian by the collar, but he says that this thing was really strong. He also noticed that when his skin touched that Dalmatian's skin also, it was like burning hot. Like, the Dalmatian was really hot. He said that the dog managed to throw him against the couch, and then it went on his forelegs and just casually walked outside. So by this point, the cops finally made it to his house. He was too embarrassed to tell them that the dog did this, so he lied and said that there was an intruder in the house. The police start checking everywhere and they don't find anyone. However, one of the police officers got really close to him and said, "Hey, can I ask you something? But I just want to make sure this stays between us because I don't want to get in trouble." And of course he was like, "Yeah, sure, what is it?" He's like, "Is the Dalmatian dog that's in the front yours?" And he was like, "Yes, that's my dog." The police again was like, "Please don't tell anybody this, because if you report that I said this, I may lose my job, but I swear on anything that when I got here and passed by your dog, I could have sworn that I heard it laughing." The police was like, "Please be very careful with that dog." After the cops left, obviously that night he could not go to sleep. He obviously locked every door, locked every window, but still couldn't manage to go to sleep. And honestly, same, because how the fuck would I go to sleep after that? When morning came, he went outside, looked at the dog, and the dog was just there like normal, like nothing had happened. The eyes didn't even look like human eyes anymore. It looked like it was the dog again. He literally goes straight to his sister's house. He goes and tells her everything that happened, thinking that she wasn't going to believe him because the story is outrageous. He was surprised that his sister took him seriously and told him, "You need to be very careful. That is not a dog." He stayed very confused, thinking, I was expecting her to be like, "It's nothing, it's not a big deal, go home." But no. Before going to work that day, he went home, he grabbed the dog, leashed it up. He said that he chained it around a tree that they had in the backyard. He mentions that Luna's little dog house was also next to the tree, so that's where he put the dog. So the following day, he goes outside because he's still feeding this dog, even though he's scared. And he said that he gets the bowl, puts the food in there, places it in front of the house. And at this point, the Dalmatian was inside the house. He hadn't seen it like walk around or anything. He does say that he kind of goes down there just to make sure the Dalmatian is in there. And when he does that, he hears like when the Dalmatian makes the kind of noise to him. In that moment, the dog started walking out of that dog house, looks up at him, and he notices those human eyes again. He says that when the dog looked up at him, the dog talked to him and said,
Hey, why don't you let me into your house? Don't you want to play with me?
This story is coming from Saltillo, Coahuila, and the guy that's telling the story says that his grandfather shared this story with him and it has just stayed with him forever. Scary shit is, I actually have family there and I've experienced the parties that they're talking about because we've had to walk like a good distance to get to parties, especially when they're in the middle of nowhere, like those really small towns. So this actually happened to the grandfather's friend, and like I said, back in the day it was more common for people to ride their horses if a party is happening like a town over, or for them to just walk all the way there. So one night they knew that there was a party happening and the grandfather said that all of his friends were gonna go, but that he decided not to go because that party was really far away and they did not have horses, so they were just gonna go ahead and take that long walk all the way over there, party, and then basically walk in the middle of the night all the way back to their town. So again, they do end up going to the party, and on their way back they realize that they're so tired because hello, they partied and now they have to do like the long walk all the way back to their town. So as they're walking back, some of them are super drunk, some of them are just delirious, and some of them are just really tired because they knew they had to go all the way back home. So one of them out loud says, "My feet hurt so bad right now that if the devil comes up to me, I will leave with him." And they all start laughing and they all agreed with him like, "Yeah, I'll go too, I'm so tired." But it was like a joke. In that moment, from a little bit far away, and just by the light of the moon, they were able to see that there was a donkey, a black donkey in the distance. They were all excited. They started running to that donkey because they were like, let's all get on and we'll take the donkey all the way home and none of us will be tired. I don't know how they did it, but they all managed to get on that donkey, and after a bit of that donkey walking towards their hometown, one of them noticed something really strange. He thought to himself, how is it possible that all 8 of us are able to get on this donkey and that the donkey is strong enough to take us? He turned to look at all of his friends just to make sure, like, are they all really on the donkey? Are we all really on it? It's strong enough. And when he did that, he actually looked down to the ground and realized that the donkey was not walking. It was like flying above the ground. He says that when he noticed that, the donkey started making sounds almost like if it was laughing, and then it just started to disappear to the point where they all just fell to the ground. Obviously, when they all hit the ground, they still managed to get up because they were so scared that they started running towards their homes. Everyone was so confused at what the hell just happened. Like, what is up with the donkey? Why were we in the air? Like, how did we all fit? But they all just ran home. The following morning, the grandfather who's telling the story to us, and the one that didn't go to the party, said that he was going to his friend's house just to see how the party went. When he went to his first friend's house, obviously that friend told him what happened with the donkey and everything. But here's the strangest part of the story, which is also very sad. About a month after that happened, all 8 of the grandfather's friends passed away in very strange ways. The people of that town came to the conclusion that maybe the devil came back for them just to seal the deal, because they all did say that they would go with him if he showed up. This lady says that something strange is happening in her home and that it hadn't happened before, so she doesn't understand why it's happening now. So they have a black cat with beautiful green eyes, and her name is Esmeralda. And they notice that Esmeralda has been acting very strange. At some points she's scared, and other points she's hissing at something that's not there. But one of the strangest phenomenon is that every time Esmeralda hisses at nothing, they notice that a light will flicker somewhere in the house. So they've kind of made a game out of it. So anytime, like, let's say they're in the living room and Esmeralda hisses, they all run to the hallway, and yes, a random room's light will start flickering. She says that at first she was like, what if there's like a faulty lighting? And they did have it checked out, but nothing is wrong. She's starting to get scared because what the hell? Why is it whenever Esmeralda hisses, a random light starts flickering? It's weird, it's strange, and she's scared. So one day they had their friends come over because they hadn't seen them in a long time, and they were gonna have dinner with them. And the friend, the girl, she goes upstairs to use the restroom, and all of a sudden she comes downstairs and grabs her husband and says, hey, I think we need to go, it's an emergency. And the girl was like, remember, we had to do this, we need to go right now. But she notices that her friend is scared. Like, she looks terrified, so she grabs her arm and is like, wait, what happened? Does something happen up there? What's going on? She was like, did you see something? What's going on? What happened up there? And the friend was like, no, I just remembered we had something to do, so we have to leave. And she left without really giving an explanation, but she knew that her friend came from upstairs like scared. Something happened up there, but her friend was not telling her what. So she says that she was so curious about what the hell had happened. And at that point, a week has gone by, and she was at the grocery store, and she sees her friend, and she's like, I'm not gonna let her leave the grocery store without her telling me what she saw in my house. So she goes up to her friend and she says, hey, please tell me what happened in my house. Ever since that day, I haven't been comfortable. I know something happened, and we cannot be in peace unless you tell me. I need to know what happened. So the friend tells her. She said that when she went upstairs to the restroom, she was looking at the, at the line at the bottom of the door where if someone passes or if someone's waiting outside, you could see their shadow. Where she says that she was standing there and she sees that a shadow stepped in front of the door. And she opens the door, obviously, because she doesn't expect anything weird. Maybe her friend was out there. And when she opens the door, she sees this ginormous shadow. This shadow that was so big that it was huddled underneath the roof, because that's how large it was, that it had to hunch over in order to fit in that house. She says in that moment she closed that restroom door so slow so that thing wouldn't notice her, and she waited until that shadow moved away from in front of the restroom door so that she can come out. And as we know, that is when she came down the stairs and grabs her husband and says they had an emergency and left the house. Her friend admits that that the reason why she didn't tell her was that she thought that maybe she and her husband were doing like black magic or like something satanic or occult. So she had already planned not to talk to her ever again because she thought that they were doing something, you know, evil in that house. And that now that she's asking her and like being very serious, like, please tell me what happened, we can't sleep, she now knows that that's not something that she was doing in her home. They are not doing black magic or anything like that. And she was like, of course I'm not doing any of that. But she asked her like, hey, that shadow that you saw that you said it was like huge, did it have facial features? What did it look like? And her friend was like, it was just a huge humanoid shadow person. I didn't see any facial features, but I was also very scared and tried to close that door so that it wouldn't see me. So she was like, as you can imagine, I am so nervous living in this house now. And they're still living there and admits that things are still going on, but now they feel bad for their cat because what if the cat is seeing this and that's why it's so scared and it hides under the beds or couches and they have no idea what to do. This girl says that she has not shared this story with anybody, and honestly it's because she's been very afraid to. This happened to her when she was 12 years old and she lived in a big house with mom and dad and their dog Gecko. She explains that Gecko was a really strange looking dog and a lot of people at first glance would be very scared of him. However, her and her parents were very used to Gecko and were not afraid of him, but he did have some really weird tendencies. Obviously, she loves her dog so much, but she would notice that when her parents were around, Gecko would act friendly, playing with the toys, wagging its tail. But when she was left alone with Gecko, he would act very different. For some reason, he would get very serious and she would catch Gecko just staring at her. She almost felt like he was analyzing her, like just trying to see what she was up to, and that there was times where he would sit down on the couch like a human, and it almost even looked like he was interested at what was showing on the TV. She says that he would sometimes even cross his legs as he's watching TV. She would start like nervously laughing because she didn't know what to make of it. But she did try to ignore it and just say that, you know, Gecko was really silly. He's really fucking silly. Even though she would try to laugh things off, she did say that in the back of her mind, she always got like chills every time she saw it. Now, she says that Gecko was also really bad. Like sometimes he would break objects off the table and things like that. One day, Gecko got in big trouble because out of all the objects he could drop and break, he ended up picking her mom's favorite mug. He dropped it off the table and it broke into pieces on the floor. Her mom was very upset, ended up telling Gecko to go outside. He would be staying the night outside and he would go without food for the night as well. Her mom was so mad that she even said he would go without water. Now, she said that she felt very bad for Gecko and having to stay out there, but he also deserved it because why does he continue to break objects in the house? So it was the punishment that he should have gotten. At least they should have given him the water, but that's just my opinion. I don't know any pets. I don't know what kind of punishments are right or wrong. So that night, after her parents had gone to bed, she was laying in bed and she started to hear little knockings on her window. Relax, nothing has happened yet. She first thought that maybe it was the tree and that the wind was making the tree branch hit her window, but then the sounds were very consistent, very intentional. She was a little bit afraid, but she ended up getting up and she pushed the curtain and she saw nobody in the backyard. After seeing nothing, she's like, okay, maybe it was just in my head, I need to relax, but she ended up getting up and she was about to go to the restroom. Why do I have chills already? I haven't even said anything. When she gets to the hallway and is about to start walking to the restroom is when she hears a voice say,
Hey, turn around.
She immediately freezes, realizing that that voice is coming from the backyard. That her legs felt like jello. She was terrified and she ended up getting the courage to walk towards the back door, and when she looks out there, all she sees is Gecko sitting down facing that back door. She could tell that he was sitting like still where it was a little bit dark, and as he gets up to walk towards where the light is, she realizes that it is Gecko, but it doesn't look like the dog anymore. This is the best way that she could explain it. She says that when she saw Gecko, it almost looked like a human who had been disguised as a dog, but the eyes looked human. The skin was very weird. It didn't look like the dog anymore. It just looked like a human pretending to be a dog. It was in that moment where Gecko tells her,
Please, give me food. I'm dying of hunger out here.
I guess I forgot to mention that when she got to the back door, she had opened it. She had opened the fucking door. What the fuck? The way she backed up, closed that door, locked it, ran to her room after hearing that. She goes, locks the door to her bedroom, locks the windows, and says that even when she laid there so scared, she continued to hear the knockings coming from her window. Every once in a while, she would hear the voice again.
Hey, please listen to me. I'm so hungry, please.
She said that she could not sleep all night. Obviously, I wouldn't either, just because I'd be scared. She said that she laid there, hugging her pillow and praying the entire night. So when she finally hears her mom and dad come downstairs, she says that she went into the kitchen and her mom was so worried because she explained to her that she couldn't find Gecko anywhere. They couldn't find the dog. The dog was nowhere to be found. Gone forever. Forever. I would have lived in constant fear. No wonder she didn't want to share this story. Like, what the fuck? The Gecko's out here with us now. Guy says that this happened when he was around 11 or 12 years old. He says that he was alone at home with his mom and his dad was traveling for work. One of the craziest shootouts happened in front of his house that resulted in a lot of people losing their lives. He said that him and his mom were hiding. They were like laying on the ground and they didn't come back up until they heard the police come. He did say that he was traumatized by this experience because he did see dead bodies on the street. And since the dad was away, he immediately called his brother and said, hey, can you come pick up my wife and my son? They just need to be away from the house for right now. He said that a lot of people who lived there and also survived this ended up leaving too, and they just didn't know when they were going to come back home. So they go and stay with his aunt and uncle, and they didn't have any kids, so he was the only kid in that house. He says he remembers like being there, but he was so out of it. Like he was shaking, he was scared, like they still hadn't gotten over what they just witnessed. His mom was the exact same way. So his aunt, trying to distract them, turns on the TV in the living room and puts on a cartoon, and then takes the mom to the kitchen and starts making coffee and something to eat for her. His aunt also brought him a blanket. She was just trying to make him feel as comfortable as she could. As he's sitting there watching cartoons, he said that he felt his aunt and uncle's cat crawl under the blanket and land on his lap. He said that he really didn't like cats, but he was thinking, oh, this is the cat's home, so I'm gonna let the cat do whatever it wants. And he started like petting it from underneath the blanket, and when he did, he said he felt like wetness, like almost with the cat licked himself, and he went to go pet, and that wetness of the cat stayed on his hand, so he felt really grossed out. He said that he really didn't want the cat on him, but he didn't want to be rude and like push it to the side, so he just let the cat sit on his lap underneath the blanket. So a few minutes pass, and his aunt comes to the living room and says, hey, you need to come to the kitchen. I already finished the food and you should come and eat. He was like, oh, I'll be there shortly, but I think your cat really likes me, so it might take a while. And his aunt is already walking towards the kitchen when she's like, don't be silly, you know we don't have cats. In that moment is when he remembered that his aunt and uncle indeed don't have any pets, much less a cat, inside of their home. He thinks that because of the trauma of everything happening, like he completely forgot, and when the cat came up, he was just like, oh well, like yeah, sit on my lap. So obviously he freezes up, and in that moment, he feels the cat crawl down and walk away somewhere else. He says that he was so scared that he couldn't even turn around and see if it was a cat. Now, for some reason, he says that he got negative vibes off of this. Like, that's the reason why he didn't want to turn to look. He says that he knew it was real because even after the cat walked away and he couldn't look, he still had that wetness from the animal on his hand. I don't know, I think maybe because he was a kid at the time, like he felt something negative, but if you ask me, like it just felt like something came in to distract him from, you know, what he just saw. I don't know, that's just my opinion. However, he still feels this way as an adult. He still feels like there's something in that house. So this guy says that when he was little, he lived in a ranch in Veracruz with his parents. They had several horses, and one particular night his dad had sent them to go feed the horses. As he was getting closer and closer to where the horses were, he said that he heard two people having a conversation. He heard when one of the voices says, I don't know, that's just how things are, and another voice responding saying, be quiet, somebody's getting closer, they're gonna hear us talking. He obviously tried to go to where he heard the voices, and the only things in there were the horses. He even started looking underneath to see if maybe there was somebody hiding in there, but of course there was nobody in there. He ends up feeding the horses, and as he's walking away, he says that he hears when somebody says, they gave us the same food as always, and then a bunch of laughter. Not the horses roasting What the fuck you gave them to eat? Time to switch it up. They're literally telling you they want something new. He actually says that when they started laughing, it was almost like they were trying to laugh like very low, not like out there. But that's when he knew that it was definitely the horses talking to each other. So this story is coming from a metro driver in Mexico. He says that there was a guy that got on the bus and the guy ends up saying, "Hey sir, if I tell you something, will you not make me get off the bus? I promise I'm not on drugs." The metro driver was a little curious, so he's like, "Okay, tell me what you need to say." This man ends up telling the metro driver he was watering his land when he finds a random cat. And he ends up talking to the cat like, "Hey kitty, what are you doing here?" To his surprise, he says that the cat responded, "Nothing, I just want to get some rest." The guy ends up saying, "Well, don't you have a home that you can go and rest to?" The cat tells him, "Yes, I have a house, but they never let me sleep. Can I just sleep the night here with you?" The guy ends up telling the cat like, "Yeah, sure," but he goes inside of his house, locks himself in the restroom, and then he started crying of how scared he was. That's when he left his house, got on the bus, and had to tell somebody what the fuck just happened. Honestly, I would be a little scared too. Like, yeah, I don't want to be alone with a talking cat, but also I'd be so curious, like, what else do you know? What other animals can talk? Like, I would try to get all the information out of this cat. God, I already thought all the things I can do with that cat. Like, I would make it go spy on people for me. This is why they don't talk to us. If I'm already thinking of how I can use this talking cat, shame on me. Shame on me. Now, here's the kicker though. After the man gets off the metro driver swears that the bus is empty, but he sees a shadow in the back of a cat. A cat shadow. The cat's probably like, "This motherfucker, like I just finished talking to him and now he tells somebody about me." Never ask your pets if they can talk or if they can understand you. This story scared the fuck out of me and I don't even have pets. Anyway, that's the title of the story, and this guy why is the dog barking right now? Anyway, this guy's at home relaxing on the couch with his dog and cat, and he's watching TV, scrolling through his phone like we all normally do. He comes across this video that was like a fun kind of video, nothing creepy, nothing spooky, where it's like you should ask your pets if they can talk or if they can understand you. You don't even finish the video where he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna ask my pet." So he turns the TV off. The dog was on his bed. The cat was sitting right next to the dog, but on the couch. He looks at his pets, and instead of asking them, he says, "I know you can talk and I know that you understand me." He was like, "You guys can't trick me." He was saying it like funny. He thought it was gonna be like a little cute moment with his dog and cat. He says that, yeah, that moment went from what he thought was gonna be funny to what the fuck is going on right now. As soon as he said that, he's looking at his dog and cat, and he says that they both turn to look at each other, turn back to look at him, and he says that they both almost give like a smile. He was in shock. He had this like insane fear that just like jolted him, and he was like, "The next thing that I did was start to play with them." He's like, the tension, this like them looking at him, he thinks that he saw them smiling, and he's like, what I decided to do next was play around with them, like, haha, yeah, like this is so fun, this is so funny. No, the fuck it was not. He ends up turning the TV back on because he's like, I just want the moment to come back to where it was before. He turns the TV on. He at this point is ignoring them. He says that they finally just go back to acting, you know, normal, whatever they were doing, and everything was fine. Of course it wasn't fine, because I wouldn't be telling you the story if everything was fine. He says that a few days passed, and unfortunately some weird things were happening. When he would go to bed at night, he would start hearing almost like a human walking inside of his home. Now this part is fucking crazy, but he claims that he also observed how his cat would talk, like call out to him when he was in his room. His dog started just walking on its hind legs, just normally about the house. I mean, that wouldn't necessarily be scary if he hadn't done what he had done. He claims that things would move and that he would lose some stuff. He would get home from work and he would walk into the cat and dog sitting on the couch just staring at him. They started just acting strange. They were doing things that they had not done before. And by this point, he did explain that he was scared that he thought his dog or cat might attack him. So there was one night where he is completely asleep and he has awoken to the sound of glass shattering on the ground. Obviously, he gets up all scared and he starts to see smoke inside of the house. He comes out of his bedroom and he realizes that his entire kitchen is up in flames. He has no idea what happened in the kitchen, but what he does see is that nearby, both his cat and dog are laughing as he comes out of the room. He said that it sounded like they were making fun of him, like they were just laughing. He runs outside of the house like half naked. He starts screaming at his neighbors, screaming at people to come out because the houses are close to each other, and if his house is on fire, it's gonna catch the next door's neighbors. So he's calling everybody to come out. People were calling the police, the firefighters, and they all started to show up because the flames were getting bigger and bigger. When the firefighters got there, obviously they tried to maintain the fire so that it doesn't go to the neighbors or anywhere else. He was actually still worried because he ends up telling them, like, my dog and my cat are inside the house. Like, he's still worried about his pets. They were able to get everything under control and they kind of saved like half of his house. Kind of goes towards the house and he tells the police and the firemen where exactly his pets were inside of the house. The firefighters tell him that when they entered, there was no animals in there. They didn't see any pets running around or anything like that. Time did pass and they also never found like skeletal remains of pets. I think that's how you call it. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but there was never a trace of those pets being burned inside of that house. However, he also never saw his pets again. He doesn't know if they maybe escaped or maybe they did burn with the house but they didn't find them, but yeah, he never saw his pets again after that. I'm not gonna lie, like, them laughing at me as they set the house on fire wouldn't want me to have these pets back again. So I don't know, maybe that was like a blessing in disguise. But he was really worried about his pets being on fire, so I can understand that. But what the fuck, dude, this whole story is fucking crazy. If you're listening to this story and your dog or your cat or your pet is next to you, go to another room. Go to another room. Do it. Just do it. Now, don't say I didn't warn you if shit gets weird and maybe your dog starts talking to you. Anyway, if your pet is still here, hi, how you doing? This guy says that he has only shared this story with a couple of people because when he has shared it, people think that he's lying, it's made up, or that maybe he just imagined things. The reason why he's also very comfortable sharing the story is because he has started hearing other stories from people who have experienced similar things, so get ready for this. This guy says that he got home from work very tired. However, his dog Zeus was super excited to see him and started jumping up and down, which was kind of Zeus's sign saying, hey, take me out for a walk. He admits that he didn't have the energy to take him out, but he did because he cared about his dog's health and he took him to a dog park. He says that Zeus is very well behaved, so he doesn't have a problem getting him off the leash and letting him run around. He has never attacked a kid or a person, nothing of that sort, so that's why he's very comfortable letting him loose. Now he's like, please don't judge me. I know I shouldn't let him off the leash, but I promise I'm responsible. I bring doggy bags. Zeus listens when I tell him to come. He has never been aggressive, so, you know, again, he trusts Zeus. So while Zeus was playing and running, he went to go sit at a bench and he said that he notices that every time Zeus would run, he would look back, find him and be like, okay, he's still here. Goes back to play, he would stop, make sure that he was still sitting at that bench just waiting for him. It was in that moment when a little kid came up to him when he was sitting at the bench. He noticed that the little boy was looking at Zeus and he was smiling, just seeing Zeus jump up and down and run. He says that the little boy turned to look at him and asked him if that was his dog. He turns to look at the kid and he's like, yeah, that's my pet, his name is Zeus. And that's when the little kid says something that shocked him. The little kid said, you know that your dog talks, right? He says that the little kid was so tiny, he didn't want to crush his imagination, so he just nodded yes, like, yep, I know that Zeus can talk because, you know, what are you gonna tell a little kid? No, he doesn't talk. That's when the little kid turned around almost like to walk away, still with a smile on his face, and he says, my dog told me that your dog was just like him. At this point, he was like confused, but also very curious. And he tells the little boy, well, how could you know any of this? And the little kid simply just said, well, why don't you ask Zeus? Cool. If he's the type of dog that talks, then he's gonna give you a response. The kid then says, because not all dogs can talk, they're not all like that. The kid turned around and left. He turned back to look at Zeus and he could tell that Zeus was watching him. Almost like if Zeus knew that they were talking about him. And then when Zeus noticed that he was looking at him, he just kept walking and running like if nothing happened. Oh my god. When they returned home, he said that what that little boy said just stayed in his head. And he was playing around. Obviously, like, it was a little kid. He's not gonna believe that. So in a joking manner, he turns to Zeus and says, can you talk? Immediately, Zeus's attitude, mannerisms changed. He says that Zeus stared into his eyes for like a minute, and then he just turned around. He went walking towards his doggy bed and he just laid on it. Okay, that's cool, that's fine. Oh my god, I'm scared. He was like, what the fuck just happened? Because he says that Zeus is not this like serious of a dog. Like, he's always hyper, he's always jumping. The way that he looked at him, turned around, went to his dog bed and just stayed there, threw him off. However, he was like, okay, whatever, that was weird, but maybe it's just what that kid told me that's making me feel even more weirder. So he simply went to bed and he went to sleep. So again, he ends up falling asleep, and he says that he was deep into his sleep when he got awoken by a sound of something falling in the kitchen. He immediately gets up and with precaution walks towards the kitchen. He turned to see if Zeus was in his doggy bed and he wasn't there, so he didn't know where Zeus was. He thought to himself that maybe Zeus also got woken up, and he went to the kitchen to see what was that sound. When he gets to the kitchen, he notices that everything's in its place. There's nothing on the floor. Like, what made that sound? He has no idea. However, the strange thing was that Zeus wasn't in the kitchen either. So he called out for Zeus, and very calmly, Zeus comes out of this like empty bedroom that he has. He says that Zeus looks at him, didn't even get close to him, and just went to lay down on his doggy bed. Almost like if he was someone that Zeus didn't know, or that maybe he didn't even care about. Anyway, following day, he goes to work, he gets home, opens the door, and Zeus is not there greeting him like every other day, where he's jumping up and down excited, wanting him to take him to the dog park. Zeus was nowhere to be found. So obviously he was in shock, and he calls out to Zeus, because at this point he's like, what if he's sick, or what if something's going on? So again, Zeus comes out of that empty bedroom, looks at him, and at this point he's trying to get Zeus excited. He gets his leash and he's like, look, you want to go to the dog park? And Zeus looks at him, doesn't get close to him again, and goes and lays down on his doggy bed. To him, he says it was evident that something was happening to Zeus, so he calls a friend who was a veterinarian, and he tells them, look, these are the symptoms, he's not coming, he's not excited, and his friend thought that maybe it was because of the age. He didn't believe that it was that, because Zeus's energy like switched just overnight. However, he really loves Zeus and wanted Zeus to be healthy, so he did make an appointment to see the veterinarian the following day. That day, they didn't go to the dog park, but he did go to sleep just worried about Zeus and hoping that it was nothing serious and that he was going to be fine. As he's laying there thinking about Zeus, he says that he could hear that someone opened the front door, and after that door was opened, it sounded like somebody was walking. He got really scared because he can clearly hear footsteps, inside of his house, and he hadn't fallen asleep yet, so he knew that it was like very real. He wasn't dreaming or anything like that. He said that he had a sword next to his bed, so he just grabbed that sword and quietly came out of his bedroom. The house was dark, but that he could still see that the front door was indeed opened. However, there was nobody in his house, and not even the trace of Zeus. He honestly couldn't believe it, but he was like, what if Zeus opened the door and escaped? But he thought that didn't make any sense because the door was locked, like you physically had to unlock it. As he's walking out of the hallway, he then starts to hear footsteps behind him. He said that he was like in shock, but when he turned around to try to look, he saw like a shadow of somebody just run past him and outside that front door. He screamed for Zeus to help him because he was scared and he didn't know what to do. That thing passed so fast, not even the sword could help him. Zeus never came. He never came. He wasn't in that empty bedroom. He wasn't laying on his dog bed. Zeus never came out. So he immediately closes the front door and locks it up. After locking it, he stepped away from the door, and that is when he started hearing something trying to open that door back up. He said that he noticed when they couldn't open it back up, so then they started kicking the door. That is when he screams like, what do you want? Who are you? What do you want from me? If you don't leave, I'm calling the police. And the thing that he heard back was somebody laughing, almost like laughing at him. And that is when he heard a voice telling him,
Alfredo, you wanted to know if I could talk. The answer is yes. And not just that, I can do so many other things.
And then it banged on the door, and he heard when the steps were walking away from his house with a very terrifying laughter. Everything stayed calm. However, he was shaking with fear, and he stayed up the entire night until morning time, and that's when he finally got the courage to open that front door. The door was full of scratch marks. Ever since that day, Zeus disappeared, and he has never seen him again. However, when he goes to sleep in his bedroom, he swears that he can hear Zeus inside of the house. When he comes out, there's nothing there. Even when he gets home from work, he swears he can hear Zeus's steps, almost like when he would get excited and run to the door, but nothing is there. He doesn't know if maybe it's just like his memories or if Zeus really is coming to visit him from time to time. So this girl says that when she was 15 years old, she got in trouble and her mom got really mad at her, and she actually went outside the house because she wanted to cry. As she's outside sitting on the ground crying, she says that her dog came up to her and said, "What's wrong with you?" She says that she ran inside of the house screaming, crying, telling her family that the dog had just talked to her, and nobody believed her. However, she says that within a week, the dog actually passed away. I have no idea what to make of this. That's why I wanted to share with you, because you need to tell me what you think about this story. Am I crazy to think that I would have probably told the dog what was wrong with me? Because it would have been a little scary, but it felt so sincere. Like the dog that you've been living with probably your whole life comes up to you as you're crying and asks you what's wrong. Also, what could have caused his death? What if he exposed himself and it's like, well, you can't expose yourself. This is a fucking movie. Like, poor dog though. What the fuck? This is a completely different story from a completely different person. This lady explains that her husband got up in the middle of the night to use the restroom, and when he did, he walked in on both of their cats talking. She explains that it's something that has stayed with him. Obviously, I think it would have stayed with me too, but she says that she does believe him because she had already heard them talking herself. I'm so nosy. Why don't they tell us what the cats were talking about? Like, I would want to know what they're talking about. What do you think two cats that live in the same home are talking about? I want to know. So this guy named Mateo says that he'd been working at the cemetery for over 20 years. His job was to help with funeral services and to keep the grounds clean and safe. The cemetery itself was really, really big, and he actually lived on the grounds in a casita in the far back. His only neighbors were the dead people and some of the stray dogs that basically lived there. Of course, with time, he got used to living at the cemetery. He says that sometimes he swore that he could see shadows in the middle of the night or people crying when nobody should be there. And sadly, sometimes people would go in the middle of the night and abandon their pets there, like just leave them there. He said that the majority of those animals that were abandoned were because they were really old and some of them looked really, really sick. So he would end up feeding them, giving them water, and if they would return and stay with them, he would make like makeshift beds for them to sleep on. He admits that he is an introvert, so it was really hard for him to make friends, so having the company of these dogs with him was really great. These dogs basically became his friends. So it was because of this that when he saw this random brown dog one day, he didn't really think anything of it. He just thought, hey, it's another dog that somebody abandoned and I'm gonna go ahead and take him in. However, he does admit that when he laid eyes on this dog, he's like, wait, this dog is not old and he doesn't look sick. Actually, his eyes look very bright, like if he had a lot of life in him. He admits that the dog gave him like this weird, uncomfortable feeling, but he didn't want to be mean and still gave the dog food and water. Nevertheless, he says that the dog ate that food like it hadn't eaten in a really long time, and when it was done, the dog was like just looking at him for like a very long time. He said that because of this, he also named the dog Coffee because of the color of its eyes. After this, Coffee was always with him if he had to go bury a hole, if he had to go plant some flowers, even if he had to go to the restroom, Coffee was always there right behind him. Coffee basically became his shadow, but everything changed after a week. He started to hear voices, and it was to the point where he was like, are people outside praying over a grave, or maybe is it the wind and I'm going crazy? But every time he would go outside to check, there was no one ever out there. No one was ever out there other than Coffee, who would always just stare at him as soon as he came outside to check and see if people have gotten into the cemetery. There was another night where he had came out to smoke a cigarette, and when he did, he saw Coffee standing on both of its hind legs, just looking towards the north side of the cemetery, almost as if he was waiting for someone. As soon as he saw him, he's like, Coffee! And he said that Coffee turned around, looked at him, went back on all his four legs, and started, running towards him to where he was. And Coffee was just back to being, his own self, as if nothing had just happened. He said that that night he found it very hard to fall asleep after that. After this, he started to notice that the other dogs didn't like Coffee. Like, as soon as they would see him, they would start growling at Coffee, and even some of them would just avoid him altogether. Even some dogs had stopped eating for days after Coffee had gotten there. Like, they wouldn't even even get near his house to eat. He just told himself that maybe it was all in his head, like nothing weird was going on. But every day he was getting more and more nervous about coffee. So there was one afternoon where he was putting the dirt back in a hole, and he said that he heard a voice. The voice said,
Mateo, Mateo, it's me down here, look down here.
Mateo immediately stops what he's doing, gets the hammer that he had on his belt, and looks around and sees nothing. He only sees Coffee a few feet away, just sitting there watching him. He thought to himself that there's no way that was Coffee, and he started saying, oh my gosh, you're so tired, you need some sleep, like it couldn't have been this dog. However, that night was one of the worst nights that he experienced. He had finally been able to fall asleep, and something inside of his house in the hallway woke him up. It sounded like long footsteps, like someone was walking inside of his house. He opened his bedroom door, and in the hallway was Coffee walking on its hind legs. Why do I have chills? I swear, oh my god. Coffee was walking and had his arms crossed like this, almost as if there was a human like hiding inside of him. When he finally looked at Coffee's face, he said that he was moving its mouth almost as if Coffee was trying to say something to him. And in that moment he wanted to scream, but nothing came out. However, he was able to just slam the door shut of his bedroom, locked it, and he just waited there just to see what was gonna happen next. Why didn't my lights just flicker, bitch? No, it's not even raining outside. It's rain. In my head it's raining outside. In my head there's a thunderstorm because there's no reason for you to fucking He stayed up all night until morning and didn't hear anything else in his house again. When he opened the door, Coffee was no longer there, and actually he never saw Coffee again after that night. He doesn't believe that Coffee was an actual dog. He thinks it was something completely different, but he's always thinking like, what did it want? Why did it go to the cemetery? Like, why did it stay there with him? What was his goal? Why was he there? Because that one night it looked like he was there waiting for something, like when he was just standing there on its hind legs. He's always questioning this, like, was Coffee a nagual? Was Coffee a brujo that was at the cemetery trying to get something? Because in Mexico, a lot of the times the reason why they have freaking security is because people do witchcraft, and sometimes people want to steal dead people bones. Fuck. He doesn't know what to make of it, but it has been a very long time and he has never seen this dog again. So this girl says that her bedroom is really close to the living room in the house, and she normally can hear everything going on. So there was one night where she couldn't go to sleep, and she decided to watch this series on her laptop with the volume really low. Out of nowhere, she started to hear like low murmurs going on in the living room, almost like if two people were talking, but like really low tone. She was wondering who was in the living room and who was talking, but then she realized that her dad was not home and only her and her dad lived in this house. She was very curious and also was a little bit scared, so she decided to get out of bed very slowly and open her door. She says that she stopped immediately because what she saw in her living room were two cats facing each other and talking. She explains that they were standing on both of their feet, just looking at each other really close, face to face, and talking. She thinks that they felt her presence because within that second they both turned their head to look at her. Then right after that they both started running towards the back door. The problem is the back door was locked and closed. She said that the cats then started running all over the house like crazy, but there was just no way for them to have gotten in the house or for them to even get out. Even though she was really scared, she said that she walked towards her front door and she opened it wide, and the cats just went running out of there like crazy. They ran so fast that she couldn't even see what direction they went to. She said that she closed the door immediately and she just stood there for a few minutes just like processing what she had just seen. Ever since that night, she can't help but to think that animals could talk and could communicate. So there's a couple who recently got married and they've moved in together. One of the ladies says that her entire life her mom has instilled in her like the love of pets, and she's always saying that she's big on energy and she always gets the best energy out of her cats. So she has this particular cat that she found. She likes to say that the cat adopted her, not that she adopted the cat, and she says she's always had really good energy with this cat. So one day she was having a really hard week and she was in bed with her wife and the cat was there with them. She started talking to her wife about everything and how her energy has been low, and she started crying because she was really emotional. Her wife tried to console her the best she could, and she started to feel a little bit better. She ended up telling her wife, "Oh my god, I love you so much. Thank you for always making me feel better." And her wife's like, "I love you so much too." So they're getting ready to get to bed, and her wife ends up going to the restroom that is in their bedroom, and she's still there, and the cat is on the bed with her, and she starts looking at her cat like, oh my god, she was about to tell the cat, "I love you so much." And that was when her cat tells her, "Te quiero mucho." Translation, "I love you so much." She said that the second the cat said, "Te quiero mucho," she was like, I just fucking heard that in my head. This is not real. However, her wife comes out of the restroom and looks at her and says, "Did the cat just say te quiero mucho?" She said that in the moment she was so shocked, she was a little scared, and the only thing that came out of her mouth was, "Ya sé que me quieres, pero no me lo digas otra vez," which means, "I know that you love me, but please don't tell me that again." She said that she couldn't stop staring at her cat, and her cat never said anything again. However, that same night, she could not sleep. And remember I told you that she was all about energies? Well, the whole night she just had like this really bad feeling, and she was laying in bed and the cat was next to her and she just couldn't fall asleep. Now, she says that she doesn't think that her cat is evil or like something different, but I think that she got scared because her cat talked to her. Come on, like how many of us would react any differently to that? However, I do know a lot of cat lovers who would wish their cats would talk to them, so I don't know, maybe some of y'all would be so happy to hear that. Anyway, how would you react if your cat talked to you? I mean, I feel like at least the cat said, "I love you." Like, it wasn't like, "I'm gonna kill you in your sleep." After that though, I probably start thinking about everything I've done in front of my cat. Like, what if I changed in front of my cat? Or what if I went to the restroom in front of my cat? And yet the cat still loved her so much. Oh my god.
Something is going on. Like, I don't know, but I think that we shifted into another dimension. Now, listen to this. So, I was looking at a world map today, and I'm like, wait a second, like all these countries are completely in a different place. Like, look at where South America is. South America has always been under North America, and now it's in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Look at New Zealand. Look at some of these other islands and where they are. You can't tell me that this map wasn't different 5 years ago. Okay, so I started going down the rabbit hole, and I looked at Home Depot, right? I go there all the time. I was there a couple weeks ago. Except it's not called Home Depot. It's called the Home Depot. Yeah, there's a "the" in front of the Home Depot. King Tut, right? We all learned about him in school, and we've seen that famous mask, right? That's solid gold that he wears. What's on the top of it? A giant cobra. Nope, there isn't one. Okay, there is a cobra, but it's to the right, and there's also another vulture on the other side. It's completely different. Think about Scary Movie 2. My favorite line to say is, "Take my strong hand." Except he never says that. Now he says, "Take my hand." If you don't believe me, look it up for yourself. Like, something is going on. We've shifted into another dimension.
Since I started covering giant stories on this channel, the stories have just been rolling in, either from people who said that they've seen things or know things. And I got another story from someone I'm going to call Nina. Don't know if she wanted me to use her real name, so I'm giving her a fake name. If you see someone in the comments saying that this is her story and she has a different name, that's her. I don't know. So better safe than sorry. But she says that she saw a giant's body, and she says that she thinks it's related to the giants of Lahontan, Nevada, which, if you don't know, Nevada used to be covered in a giant ocean-like body of water called Lahontan, and it eventually evaporated. This was all during the last ice age, and now what's left is Pyramid Lake. She was like, you need to go down this rabbit hole, but she thinks that what she saw between 2003 and 2005 was related to this. So between 2003 and 2005, her mom had decided to go back to school to get her doctorate. It was something her mom always wanted to do, but her ex-husband never allowed her to. So as she's going through this divorce, she's like, you know what, I'm going to do something for myself. Mind you, at the time that she decides to go back to school and she's getting this divorce, she is sick with stage 4 cancer, but she's not going to let that slow her down. Nina says she became her courier. Basically, she was driving her to all her classes, and eventually her mother secured an internship at the Nevada State Museum and the Carson City Coroner's Office. Nina says the things that they had in their archives were both amazing and scary. They had a lot of remains of indigenous and native tribes that the tribes were actually suing for return, but for whatever reason, the museum was saying, we can't give them back. Allegedly, they had 2 bodies in their possession that were gigantic, at least 3 meters long with red hair. The museum was allegedly claiming that these bodies were lost and that they were unavailable for return. But Nina was helping her mother build an exhibit called Under One Sky. And as they were building it, she says she remembers several indigenous elders coming up to her mother and asking about these remains. And what happened after these elders were asking about these remains was actually the reason that her mother lost her internship and got fired. Also, if I haven't said it already, these stories are for entertainment purposes only. I can't prove the validity of any of them. All of these stories are alleged. Nina says that a lot of the time when these elders would come up and start talking to her mom about it, her mom would take the conversation in private. She wouldn't have these conversations in front of Nina. But one night something happened and her mom decided that she was going to help these elders get the remains back. She enlists the help of Nina and they sneak in and they get the remains and they give them back to the elders. I don't know how this whole process went down, by the way. She did not go into detail. I don't know if they snuck in one night or if it was as simple as they just walked in and handed them a box of these remains. But these elders take her mom then to a large building where the medicine people in the tribe work. Nina was instructed to wait outside. Her mom comes out shortly after. A few days later, her mom had scans to see how much chemo and radiation was needed. And the doctors are shocked because now all of a sudden she is cancer-free when previously she had stage 4. Nina says that prior to this doctor's appointment, her cancer had been so severe that she had actually already began the process of guardianship for her younger sisters. Also don't know her mother's reaction, but Nina was completely shocked. And she says the chances of her mom surviving 269, which is how old she is now, are 0.000128%. She has lived 21 years past her diagnosis. She says, I don't care what people think. Giants are real. I'm grateful for the woman who raised me and medicine people who healed my mother.
This time, I saw her face. It was so beautiful and soft, almost angelic. She reached her hand out to me, and being a child, I followed her in my dreams. She would lead me to the woods and sometimes show me my own grave. I could hear many whispers, completely incoherent, but still audible. Whenever I woke up, I'd be drenched in sweat. I eventually told my mom that I was having the same dream. Sometimes it even came during sleep paralysis. After I told her, she didn't see it as a coincidence. She made both my brother and me recite the same Bible passage and blessed us with holy oil. After that, neither of us saw her again. I thought that was the end. But the second time scared me the most. Terror wouldn't even begin to explain what I felt that night. I was staying with my boyfriend at his parents' house. I was 18 at the time and usually stayed there on the weekends or for a few days. My boyfriend, like my brother, is known to sleepwalk and talk. It's funny sometimes, but it usually scares me. That night, we were asleep in his room when I heard him get up. He was sleepwalking again, so I quietly guided him back to bed, and we both fell asleep. At around 2 a.m., I felt it again, the chills and the overwhelming sense of being watched. I couldn't move. Then I saw her in the corner of the room, whispering, "Come, come, we have to go." I was confused. Go where? I thought. She still had the same angelic face, but when she reached out her hand, it didn't match. Her hand looked like a corpse that had been in water for years. In my head, I kept repeating, "No, I'm not going." Each time I denied her, her face began to change. The more I refused, the more her face contorted into something beyond my understanding. I was terrified. I started reciting the same Bible passage my mom had taught me. Before she disappeared, she said, "You will come." And then she vanished. The next day, I called my mom, who once again blessed me with holy oil. My mom always says, just because it's beautiful doesn't mean it's holy. I still don't know what would have happened if I had gone with her. All I know is that whatever she was, it was not good.
Every time about a woman that did a justice spell on someone because she thought that they deserved it, but now she's not so sure. I'm gonna go ahead and tell the story in the first person, but it did not happen to me. The person who submitted it wants to be anonymous. When I was a teenager and in my early 20s, I used to practice witchcraft. At about 19 years old, I met my boyfriend. Not long after I met him, he started spending over so many nights that eventually he moved in. Now, 19, I already had a daughter and I had my own place. I was pretty mature for my age. Not long after, him and I got pregnant with a baby and things kind of moved pretty quickly, leading to me going to meet his family. This is when the story truly starts. The moment I met his grandfather, something about him just felt off. Like I just felt this negative energy surrounding this man. After we left, my boyfriend told me that his grandfather could never be left alone with either of our children because apparently when my boyfriend was a baby, his grandfather used to hit him.
Later, while we were having dinner at his mother's house, we were talking about the grandfather, and his mom opened up more. She said that her father, which happens to be the grandfather, was not a good father to her, that he had 8 children living in a small shack with 1 room and 1 outhouse, and that he provided absolutely no food for them. Their mother had to maintain a small garden in the backyard just so they could have some sort of food to eat. He drank every single night and was physically abusive to all of the children. My boyfriend also said that if we had a daughter, that she was never going to meet her grandfather. At the time, I didn't fully understand the severity of it until I found out that the grandfather had also SA'd one of the girls, like one of the children, like one of his children when they were young. After hearing all about this, thinking about my children, I went home and I did something that to this day, I'm not sure if it was the right thing. I literally could not sleep that night. Like, I was just tossing and turning. So under the full moon, I performed a spell and asked for justice for the little girl who was now 50 years old, but the little girl that had been SA'd by her father all those years ago. About a week later, we received a call from his mother crying, saying that the grandfather had been diagnosed with leukemia that had spread throughout his whole body and that he only had a couple weeks to live. Around that time, the grandfather had always been very confident about his health and believed that he would outlive all of his children. Not long after, his funeral took place. Then a few years later, the grandmother developed dementia so bad that she had absolutely no understanding of her reality. My children never met either of the grandparents. I've never told anyone about the spell that I casted that night, but now that I have become a Christian, I sometimes look back and question everything. Did I do something wrong by taking matters into my own hands, or was that justice or karma? I really like to hear what other people think, so if you guys want to comment down below your thoughts, and I'll make a whole separate video talking about everyone's comments.
So I wanted to talk about a news story I seen the other day. There was this woman in southeast Oklahoma who was mauled by some type of unidentified animal. And what's strange about this is they don't know exactly what it is. She described it as being dog-like, and apparently this thing let out some kind of growl or roar. She is in pretty critical condition, but instantly when I heard that word dog-like, this area of southeastern Oklahoma is known for dogman sightings. In fact, not too far from this area, there is a cemetery. And in that cemetery, there's a tombstone. And on it, it reads, there was a woman who, in 1918, her cause of being deceased was by some sort of human-like dog. And not too far from this area, you also have the Choctaw Reservation, which has been infamous with a lot of strange things happening. There was a story from the Choctaw Reservation of this woman and her husband. They were sitting out front of their home on their porch one night when they noticed something in front of their house in a field running. The dog that's sitting on the porch with them, it notices this thing and it takes off after it. And as it's chasing this thing, she gets a better view of what it is. It looked kind of like a very large dog, but it was running very strange. It had dark black fur with some white on the top of its head. And she started to freak out and yell at her dog, come back here. But this dog continued to go after it. But she said the strangest thing happened. The dog started to run in the opposite direction, as if it was confused. But this is a livestock guardian dog. It never breaks off of something it's chasing. But for some reason, this dog seemed disoriented. Now, she yells for her husband. Her husband jumps on his four-wheeler, and he drives after the dog. And as he's chasing the dog, trying to get him to come back, he sees this thing jump over a fence. And as it jumps the fence, it stands on 2 legs and takes off into the woods. Now, is this some kind of dogman encounter. It could possibly be some type of wild animal attack, as this area is known for bears and mountain lions. Or is this something else? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. There's a very well documented case of a skinwalker that comes out of Phoenix. Now, there was this guy who came forward and he said that his mother lived next to like a couple 100 acres of desert. And he said, he was often afraid because she lived alone, but she did not want to move. Well, one night she awoke at like 2 a.m. and her dog was barking at the door. So she got up and figured he needed to go outside and use the bathroom. So she puts him on the leash and she starts walking him around the backyard. She said that's when she heard what sounded like her husband's voice coming from out in the desert behind some brush. She heard the voice say, "Are you there? Are you still there?" And she said, she called out her husband, Ingram, like, is that you, Ingram? And she said, the voice responded back, "Yes. Now come out here into the desert, come behind this brush. Just come on." And she's like, "No, Ingram, you are deceased." And so she took off running with the dog back into the house. Well, for several weeks, she would have something knocking at her door, banging at her windows. When she would go to answer the door, there would be no one there. She would hear laughs and screams coming from outside. And she, eventually told her son about what had happened. And he come over to the house a couple times, and he couldn't find anything or find anyone. They reached out to the police. The police set up patrols. They couldn't find anything or catch anyone that was harassing this old lady. And then she said one night there was a really bad thunderstorm. And after the thunderstorm had stopped, she hears a knock at the door. She goes to answer it, and when she opens the door, she's surprised to see her husband, Edgar. And she was so excited that she almost gave him a hug, but then she was like, wait a second, he's been deceased for, a couple years now. And she said it looked like Edgar, but it was just like his face was just, something was off about it. It almost looked rubbery, kind of like the skin, was hanging off the cheekbone. And she said this thing that looked like her husband said, "Are you here still? It's me, it's Edgar. Let me in the house and give me a hug." And she was like, "No, Edgar, you're deceased. You're not real. You're not here." And she said he kept saying, "Just let me in the house. Come on, I am real. I'm your husband." And so she said she pushed him away because he moved in close on her. And as she pushed him away, she said he felt ice cold. He turned and then ran off into the desert. So immediately she calls her son, who he calls the police. They go out there, they search the area, they couldn't find anything. Now, her son started to think okay, maybe she's losing it as she's getting older, because we never see anything. And this, sounds pretty crazy what she's explaining. Until one night he happened to pull in front of her house, and he said he sees this man standing next to her door. And when he locked eyes with him, he could see that he had these bright yellow eyes. And he said this man turned, took off running towards the desert, but he got down on all fours just like an animal.
Early on the evening of Sunday, November 27th, 2005, a 21-year-old woman named Catherine Woods leaned towards the mirror to put on her eyeliner inside the bathroom of her small apartment in New York City. Catherine's phone was sitting on the bathroom counter, and she heard it buzz, but she didn't even look to see who was calling. She didn't have time to talk to anyone, because she had to finish getting ready for her 7 o'clock shift at work. So Catherine had moved to New York City from Ohio 3 years earlier to pursue her dream of becoming a dancer on Broadway. But everything here was so expensive that in addition to chasing her dream, she also had to work 3 different jobs just to make ends meet. Now, 2 of those jobs were pretty standard. She worked as a waitress and also taught children's dance classes. But tonight, she was getting ready to go to her 3rd job. And this job was not really standard at all. In fact, to her, she was sort of embarrassed about it. And because of that, she was keeping it a secret from almost everybody in her life. Her 3rd job was working as a topless dancer at a strip club near Times Square called Flash Dancers. Catherine honestly hated the work, but it paid really well, and if she wanted to have her shot at Broadway, she needed to pay for voice lessons and dance classes. Now, she did live in Manhattan, which was the most expensive part of the already very expensive city, and she knew that she could save some money if she just moved to a neighborhood where rent was cheaper. But when she had first moved to New York, she had lived in a less expensive neighborhood for that reason, and unfortunately, her landlord had sexually assaulted her. The experience had been so traumatic that Catherine had, at the time, considered just leaving New York and going back to Ohio and just being done with this place. But in the end, she had decided to stay in New York and continue chasing her dream. Now, she did move within New York. She'd gotten this apartment in Manhattan because it was a lot safer, and she also got a roommate to help with the cost. His name was David Hahn. He was 23, and he was one of Catherine's friends from back home in Ohio. But at this very moment, David was not inside the apartment. He'd gone outside to get his car so he could drive Catherine to work. Catherine finished her makeup and left the bathroom, and as she walked through the living room, she stepped over a black dog that was sleeping on the floor. The dog was not Catherine's, and it actually was not David's either. David was a part-time dog sitter, so this dog was just staying with them while its owners were out of town. Just like Catherine, David also had a bunch of part-time jobs to help make ends meet. When he wasn't dog sitting, he worked as a doorman at a hotel just up the street from their apartment. Now, Catherine and David had actually been romantic at one point. They had dated for a little while, but these days they were just roommates, living together to split the bills. Although, secretly, Catherine did sometimes wonder if, maybe they should give it another shot to try being a couple again. Thanksgiving had been a few days ago, and instead of going home to Ohio like she usually did, Catherine had stayed in New York and celebrated with David, and it had been a really nice time. Plus, David knew about Catherine's third job of working at Flash Dancers, and he didn't judge her for it, and Catherine felt like a lot of people did, so she liked that about him. But the biggest hurdle that Catherine could see to potentially rekindling their relationship was the fact that David disliked basically every man she met. Whether she was dating them or not, he just did not like them. Now, some of these guys, she could understand why David, didn't like them. Like there was this guy, Joe, that she had dated briefly, who really she'd only met because he was a patron of her strip club. But then there were people like Paul, who was a personal trainer at Catherine's gym, who she'd only seen off and on, and who was nothing but nice to David. And even though Paul and Catherine were not dating now and mostly just spoke on the phone periodically, David still insisted that Paul was a creep. He just did not like the guy. But for now, Catherine figured, you know what, I'm not going to figure out my entire romantic life. I just need to finish getting ready and go downstairs so she wouldn't keep David waiting. So Catherine went into her bedroom and began getting dressed. And that's when she heard that dog start barking at something in the living room. And so, curious, Catherine walked in that direction to see what was going on. A little while later, Catherine's roommate, David, walked quickly along the sidewalk to get his car, which was parked a ways up the street. He was out of breath by the time he reached it. He knew he had to hurry, so he jumped in and he drove back to the apartment building and he called Catherine as he pulled up out front. When she didn't answer, he threw on his hazards and he climbed back out to go into the building to go get her. And he had just made it up the flight of stairs that led to his second floor apartment and he was going down the hallway when he saw something that made him come to an abrupt stop. It was that black dog that he was dog sitting. Somehow it had gotten out of the apartment and was just standing there in the shared hallway outside of his apartment door. David blinked and then realized that his neighbor, a man he rarely interacted with named Brad Stewart, was standing right behind the dog. And Brad was holding a leash that was clearly clipped onto the dog's collar. For a second, Brad looked surprised, and David was just completely confused about why this guy had the dog that he was dog sitting on a leash. But then Brad told David that he had found the dog wandering around, recognized it as David's, and brought it back to his apartment. Brad said he had just knocked on David's apartment door, but so far nobody had answered. So at this point, David understood, why Brad has the dog, but he didn't know why the dog was out of the apartment in the first place. But he kept that to himself and just thanked Brad, took the leash, and then stepped over to the door of his apartment, number 2D.
Might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
The apartment door was shut, but when he turned the handle, he found that it was unlocked. David couldn't remember if he had left it unlocked or not, so he just opened it, and he called out Catherine's name. But there was no answer, which was weird, so he stepped inside. Now, he didn't see Catherine, but he did see the door to her bedroom was slightly cracked open, so he walked over to it, and he called out to her again. And then when she didn't call back, he tried pushing her door open. But the door didn't really open. It instead swung maybe a few inches and then stopped. And David felt resistance on the other side, like something maybe on the ground was holding the door from opening all the way. And so now, with all these strange things happening, David's starting to feel pretty worried. And so the surge of adrenaline came over him, and he just shoved the door open, and he stuck his head in, and he looked inside. And when he saw what was in there, he immediately pulled back, turned around, ran into the hallway, and he called the police. A half an hour later, around 7:30 p.m., an NYPD detective named Stephen Getz walked up a flight of stairs at an apartment building in Manhattan. This part of the city was known to be extremely safe. Homicides never really happened here. But if the 911 caller had been telling the truth, Getz knew that a potential grisly murder scene was in fact waiting for him in apartment 2D. When he reached the second floor landing, he saw there were already a few other NYPD officers on the scene, and one of them was speaking to this young, skinny guy standing in the hallway who looked really upset, and he was holding a leash that was connected to a black dog. Another officer walked over to Getz and filled him in. He said the man that was being spoken to was the victim's roommate, David Hahn, and he was the one who had found the body and called 911. The victim, Catherine Woods, was inside the apartment in the back bedroom. Getz nodded and then walked down the hallway, past David and the dog, toward the apartment door. His plan was to look at the scene himself before he began questioning anyone. Getz put on some disposable rubber gloves and checked out the door frame to the actual apartment, and then he also looked at the door itself. But he didn't see any damage that could signify forced entry. So he stepped into the apartment, and he saw that the small living room was a little bit messy. But it wasn't like it had been ransacked or something. The futon was pulled out, and there were some men's clothes strewn around, but it sort of looked like a typical place that people lived. And so Getz walked through the living room, being careful not to disturb anything, and he went towards what he assumed was the bedroom, where the body was. The door was open just wide enough that Getz was able to get through. And when he stepped through and was inside the room, he saw blood everywhere. It was all over the walls and the furniture, and the room itself looked like it had been completely torn apart. One of the dresser drawers was open, and lots of women's clothing was scattered all over the place, and the mattress had been completely taken off the bed frame and was now lying on the floor, and that's actually what was blocking the door from opening all the way. And then, in the middle of the room, in a pool of blood, lay the body of a young woman. Getz knew from the 911 call that her name was Catherine Woods. He walked over and squatted down next to her for a closer look. She was wearing a t-shirt and underwear, and the t-shirt had a very obvious shoe print on it, like whoever had killed Catherine had stepped on her. And there were at least a dozen stab wounds all over her body. There were also what appeared to be defensive wounds on her hands and arms, which Getz knew meant she must have fought back against her attacker. But the worst injuries she sustained were definitely to her neck. Whoever had killed her had slit her throat so deeply that they had almost decapitated her. And so to Getz, right away, it seemed like whoever killed Catherine had been in an absolute rage. At that point, Getz heard footsteps coming from behind him, and he stood up and he turned around to see that the NYPD forensics team had arrived. Now, the blocked door was making maneuvering in and out of this bedroom pretty difficult, so one of the first things the forensics team did was to pick up the mattress and carefully lean it against the wall, so the bedroom door could now swing open all the way. Then Detective Getz just stepped back and let the forensics team get to work. He watched as they pulled that shoe print off the t-shirt Catherine was wearing, and then also there was a second identical shoe print that was on her bed sheets that they also grabbed. To Getz, both of these prints did appear to be from the exact same shoe, and to the naked eye, these prints appeared, at least to Getz, to belong to very likely an average-sized man. Detective Getz was immediately curious about something, so he stepped out of the bedroom into the living room, and he quickly found a couple pairs of men's shoes lying on the floor. And although the tread of these shoes did not match the prints he had just seen in the bedroom, they did appear to be the exact same size. An hour later, at about 8:30 p.m. on November 27, 2005, Detective Getz sat down at a table inside of an interview room at the NYPD's 19th Precinct. And once he did, he handed a bottle of water across the table to David Hahn, the roommate of the murder victim, and Detective Getz' current number one suspect. There had been no sign of forced entry at the apartment that David and Catherine shared, which meant that Catherine's killer either had access to the apartment or was let inside by somebody who did. And the murder had been committed with a knife in a really savage way that struck Getz as being a personally motivated attack. Even though Catherine's bedroom had been trashed, nothing seemed to have been stolen, and because Catherine had been found partially undressed, there was potentially a sexual motive at play as well. So Getz's working theory here was that this murder was committed by a man who knew the victim well and had easy access to her living space. And David fit that profile to a T. Plus, he apparently wore the same size shoe as the killer. Although, as Detective Getz settled into his chair and brought out his notepad, he did a quick scan of David's forearms and his hands, and he saw that David had no visible cuts, scrapes, or bruises. The detective thought that Catherine's killer likely would have some injuries there because she had obviously been fighting for her life. She would have left a mark on them. But Getz didn't say anything about this to David. Instead, he just leaned forward and he asked David to walk him through what had happened that day. David's hands were shaking a bit, but he took a deep breath to calm himself, and he said that he had been at the apartment with Catherine that night until about 6:40 p.m. That was when he had left to go get his car so he could come back and drive Catherine to her 7 o'clock shift at Flash Dancers. But he said retrieving his car had taken longer than he expected, because on the way, he had run into some of his coworkers from his doorman job, and he had stopped to chat with them. He said after he had done that and he had gotten his car and he went back to the apartment, he had expected Catherine to be waiting outside by the curb. But when he got there, there was no sign of her, and she didn't answer when he called her. So David said he'd ultimately gone inside and ran upstairs to the apartment, and in the hallway he had found his neighbor, Brad, who was oddly holding the leash of the black dog that David was supposed to be looking after. And then David said he went into his apartment, and that's when he found Catherine's body. David said he had called 911 right away. It was right around 7 p.m. And at this, Getz stopped writing on the notepad and just looked up at David. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. David was claiming that he'd only been out of the apartment for 20 minutes, and that in that narrow window of time, Catherine had been brutally murdered and the killer had also escaped. It honestly sounded like one of the worst alibis Getz had ever heard. But he didn't want David to know just how close he was to getting arrested for murder, because he didn't want David to get scared and stop talking. So Getz kept his tone very sympathetic as he asked how long David had known Catherine for. David said they had met back in Ohio a few years ago while Catherine was visiting her hometown. They'd begun dating, and he had ultimately moved out to New York to live with her. But it wasn't long before Catherine broke up with him and then asked him to move out. But David said he had not been able to afford his own place, so he had started sleeping in his car. And Catherine had felt bad about that, so she had ultimately let him move back in on the condition that he slept on the futon out in the living room. By now, Detective Getz's pen was flying across the page, because David was not just Catherine's roommate, he was her ex-boyfriend. An ex-boyfriend who was the last person to see Catherine alive and discovered her body. Getz was more confident than ever that he was sitting across from Catherine's killer. He told David that everything he was saying was incredibly helpful, but right now, he needed to go check on something. David agreed to wait, and Getz stood up to leave. But he stopped at the door, and he asked David for one last thing before he left. He asked what his shoe size was. And without missing a beat, David answered that he wore a 10.5. Getz jotted this down, and then he left. What he hadn't told David was the reason he was stepping out of the room was to go get some information from the NYPD's forensics team and the uniformed officers who were currently questioning David's neighbors. And once Getz had that information, he was going to use it to try to catch David in a lie. About 19 hours later, so about 3 p.m. the next day, Getz was sitting at his desk feeling completely exhausted, but was pounding yet another cup of coffee. He'd been up all night interrogating David, who was still literally sitting right down the hall in the interrogation room. And also, Getz had been going back and forth with the forensics team and other officers and detectives who were out in the neighborhood, and he still had loads more to do before he could finally go to sleep. Right now, Getz was going over a new batch of reports from the uniformed officers who had gone door to door in Catherine and David's apartment building, asking the neighbors if they'd seen or heard anything unusual. And just like Getz had hoped, the information they were getting did contradict pieces of David's story. David claimed that he had left the apartment at about 6:40 p.m. and said that at that time, Catherine was fine. But two neighbors said they heard screams coming from the apartment before 6:40 p.m. The man in the unit directly above David and Catherine said he had heard 3 screams at 6:28 p.m. And the people in the unit next door to David and Catherine said they'd heard screaming, barking, and the sound of furniture moving around even earlier, between 5:45 and 6 p.m. Now, none of these neighbors had done anything about these noises because the noises had stopped pretty quickly. And then there was Brad Stewart, the neighbor who had said he had found the black dog. Brad told police that when he ran into David in the hallway, it was sometime between 6 and 6:30. But David had said that he went back up to the apartment and found Catherine's body at about 7 p.m., a full half hour later. Now, Getz knew witnesses were often bad with time, and in a dense New York City apartment building, there were lots of noises coming from lots of units, but still, it looked to him like David's alibi had serious problems. And so the detective sat back and had some more coffee, and then his phone rang. He picked it up, and it was the forensics team with an update about those shoe prints that were on Catherine's shirt and the bedsheets. And the prints were indeed left behind by a roughly average-sized man. They were a men's size 10.5. And this was the exact size Getz knew David wore. Getz thanked them, hung up the phone, and then rushed back to the interrogation room to have yet another chat with David Hahn. This time, though, Getz did not offer David a water. He just sat down and he confronted him with all these new facts. He told David that the killer's shoe prints were exactly his shoe size, that his neighbors had heard screams before David had supposedly left the building, and that Brad said he'd seen David in the hallway at least a half an hour earlier than David had claimed he was there. Getz leaned in and told David that there were also security cameras in the apartment building, and his officers were already in the process of getting access to that footage. So if David had anything to say, he better say it now. Getz watched as David's expression went from exhausted to clearly afraid. It seemed like this might be the first time that David realized the police truly did not believe his story. And after a second of just stunned silence, David insisted that he had not killed Catherine, and he begged Getz to believe him. But when Getz just glared back at him completely unmoved, David launched into a whole new story, one he had not mentioned at all over the last 20 hours of interrogation. David said Catherine knew this guy named Paul Cortez. She had dated him, but David had always thought he was kind of a creep. And David said Catherine had told him that Paul was obsessed with her. So David said the police really ought to go investigate Paul, not him. To Getz, this seemed like a desperate last-minute attempt to cast suspicion on somebody else. But he knew he did have to follow every lead, so he did write down Paul's name and told David they'd look into it. When Getz finally left the station for the evening, David was still in the interrogation room, and reporters from all the daily papers were beginning to assemble right outside. The following morning, the story of Catherine's murder and pictures of her smiling face were all over the news. The front page of the New York Daily News carried a headline that made Getz grimace. It read, "Secret Life of Slain Stripper." Inside, the article reported that Catherine's family hadn't known she was working as a topless dancer until they literally flew to the city from Ohio to collect her body. Getz skimmed the article at his desk. He wasn't convinced that Catherine's line of work had anything to do with her murder, but the papers seemed intent on running with it. And a media circus was like the last thing Getz wanted. His team was already under enough pressure to make an arrest as it was. And it was going to be even harder to do their jobs now that a bunch of tips were going to be flooding in from the public from all this media. Getz put down the newspaper, got up from his desk, and walked down the hall to the interrogation room. He'd finished the day yesterday feeling pretty confident that David was his murderer. So when he'd sent David home, he had given him instructions not to leave the city, because he intended to arrest David and soon. But first, Getz did need to follow up on the other leads he had, to hopefully rule them out. And one of those leads was sitting in the interrogation room right now waiting for him. It was Paul Cortez, the man that David had named, who officers had tracked down and brought in, the man who supposedly was obsessed with Catherine. As soon as Getz entered the room, the first thing he did was look at Paul's shoes, and he could see that they were a pretty typical size too. At a glance, they looked like they could also be a 10.5. Getz also looked for scratches or bruises on Paul's skin, in particular on his forearms and his hands. And he did see one. There was a small injury on one of Paul's fingertips. Getz asked about it, and Paul said his finger had just gotten pinched between a couple of weights at the gym. Paul was very calm and soft-spoken, and he said he'd heard all about Catherine's death in the papers, and he just wanted to help if he could. When Getz told him that they'd gotten his name from David Hahn, Paul just kind of rolled his eyes and said, David had always been jealous of his relationship with Catherine. Paul explained that he had met Catherine at the gym about a year ago, and they'd been dating off and on ever since. At the time of Catherine's death, he said they had been off, but Paul said he still cared about her and had hoped that maybe one day they might get back together. Paul told Getz that he hadn't actually seen Catherine on the day of her death, but that he had actually spoken to her on the phone earlier that afternoon, which was not unusual. The two did speak on the phone from time to time. That's all it was. Paul said he actually had tried calling her a second time that day, but she didn't answer. But Paul said he really didn't think much of it. And then Paul said that night he wound up going shopping with some friends and then also to a local bar to watch the Jets game at about 8:30. Getz made a note to follow up on Paul's alibi. Then he asked Paul if he had any idea who might have killed Catherine. Paul thought for a moment, and then his eyes lit up, and he said there had been some stalker guy named Joe who'd been one of Catherine's regulars at the strip club. Months ago, he'd somehow gotten Catherine's phone number and had reached out to her outside of the club. And around that same time, Catherine had actually gotten roofied during one of her strip club shifts. A roofie is called the date rape drug. It basically makes you incapacitated and effectively unconscious. You don't remember anything. People will be given a roofie and then be sexually assaulted. That's often its use. And even though he'd never been able to prove this, Paul always suspected it had been Joe who gave Catherine that roofie. Catherine had cut off contact with Joe, but the whole incident had bothered Paul so much that he tried to convince Catherine to just quit the exotic dancing scene. But she refused. Paul admitted that he actually went on to call Catherine's father to tell him how worried he was about her. And Catherine had been so mad about that she stopped talking to Paul for weeks. And so Getz jotted all this down and then asked Paul if he knew how to get in touch with this guy Joe. Paul said he didn't have Joe's number, but it was definitely in Catherine's phone. Because the last time Paul ever spoke on the phone with Catherine, on the afternoon of her death, she had mentioned something that really surprised him. She said that after months of silence, Joe had started calling her again, completely out of the blue. And at this, Getz studied Paul's face, looking for any hint of deception. This whole Joe story seemed like it might just be a way to deflect suspicion from Paul himself. But it really didn't feel like Paul was lying here. And besides, Catherine's phone records would be simple enough to verify. Getz hated to admit it, but maybe the newspapers were right. Maybe it was time he started looking seriously into some of Catherine's customers at the strip club. The following afternoon, on Wednesday, November 30th, Detective Getz was feeling really annoyed as he hung up the phone at his desk. It had been a call from another reporter, but Getz hadn't made an arrest yet, so he was staying tight-lipped. But for now, he just turned his focus back to the stack of papers on his desk. They were Catherine's cell phone records, which he'd subpoenaed yesterday, and they showed that Paul had been telling the truth. Both he and Joe had called Catherine shortly before she died. So he'd brought in Joe for an interview, and he asked him to explain why, after months of silence, he had called Catherine right before she turned up dead. And Joe had replied he'd only called her to check in, to say he hoped she had a nice Thanksgiving. He had claimed that he was really just trying to be friendly. But then Getz just asked Joe point blank if he had ever roofied anyone's drink before. And at this, Joe's eyes went wide and he kind of sputtered out that he would never dream of doing anything like that. But based on Joe's tone, Getz really felt like he was lying. And so now, Getz felt like the entire investigation was wide open. A few days ago, he had been absolutely confident that David was the killer. But men from Catherine's life just kept coming out of the woodwork. He now had 3 main suspects instead of just 1. In fact, at this point, his original suspect, David, was actually looking more innocent. Getz's officers had spoken to David's coworkers at the hotel where he worked as a doorman, and they confirmed that he really had stopped and talked to them on the evening of Catherine's death, just like he had claimed. And while Getz had hoped that the security camera footage from the apartment building would prove David was lying about his alibi, at least in terms of when he was there, it actually showed David leaving the front entrance of the building at 6:38 p.m., which lined up with David's story because he said he left around 6:40. Now, this did not prove that David was innocent. Based on what the neighbors had heard, she could have been killed before 6:38, but there weren't a lot of cameras in the apartment building, and no angle covered the hallway outside of apartment 2D. So the footage couldn't prove one way or another, whether Brad Stewart or anybody else for that matter had gone into the apartment while David was gone. Just then, his phone rang. Getz reached for it, expecting it to be another reporter, but this time he was pleasantly surprised. It was a member of the forensics team, and there was this obvious excitement in their voice. He told Getz that they'd just discovered something big, something they completely missed during their first sweep of Catherine's apartment. The forensics team member explained that when they'd first entered Catherine's bedroom, they had taken that mattress that was stuck behind the door and propped it up against the wall to get it out of the way. But when they'd done that, the mattress had actually covered up something that was right there on the wall all along. A bloody handprint. It was not until a couple of days later, after they'd carefully gone over everything else in the room, that they moved the mattress back down onto the floor, and that's when they found the handprint. Getz's face lit up when he heard this news, because now he knew all he had to do was go get handprints from all of his suspects, which seemed like that would be pretty easy to do. But he quickly realized he had a problem, because some of his suspects had already lawyered up at this point, and they were refusing to speak with police, let alone hand over their prints. And Getz really could not force them to give their prints unless he arrested them. And so that meant Getz was now in this weird catch-22, because he needed the suspect's prints in order to make the arrest, but he also couldn't get their prints unless he arrested them. So at this point, the investigation kind of stalled out. Weeks went by, and Detective Getz started to get really frustrated because there was just nothing he could legally do to push the case forward. However, the case was still receiving a ton of coverage in the press, and to a lot of people, it looked like the NYPD was just sort of dropping the ball here. But then on December 16th, so 3 weeks after Catherine's murder, the news coverage that had annoyed Getz so much actually ended up giving him exactly what he needed. That day, a woman called the NYPD because of something she had seen on the front page of one of the newspapers in New York. And what this woman said led Getz directly to Catherine's killer. Based on forensic evidence and numerous interviews, this is what police believe happened to Catherine Woods on the evening of November 27, 2005. Shortly after 6:40 p.m., the killer climbed the stairs inside of Catherine's apartment building. They knew that at that very moment, she'd be getting ready for another shift at Flash Dancers. And the fact that she even worked there secretly really bothered the killer way more than they would ever let on. The idea of Catherine dancing and giving her attention to other men made the killer so jealous they couldn't even stand it. Now, the killer had tried to talk with Catherine and win her over, but she had rejected him. So the time for talking was over. And so the killer quietly walked up to the door of apartment 2D and reached down and turned the handle, which was unlocked. As they slipped silently into the apartment, the killer brought out the knife that they had hidden inside of their sweatshirt. But then something they had not anticipated happened. There was this dog lying on the apartment floor that got up and began to bark at them. For a moment, the killer thought about just abandoning the plan and leaving, but then Catherine, alerted by the dog, came out of the bedroom and looked right at the killer and saw the knife in their hand. Catherine screamed and ran right back into her bedroom, the very bedroom that she had made explicitly off limits to the killer. And just thinking about that, the surge of anger suddenly overtook them, and the killer charged into the room after her. Catherine was already on the other side of the bed, lifting up the mattress as a sort of barricade, but the killer just forced their way past it, and they grabbed Catherine from behind. But Catherine, she fought back. She began thrashing around, doing everything she could to break free. But she couldn't, and so they struggled and began smashing into the furniture and knocking things down all over the room. And it was around this point that the killer lifted up that knife they had brought, and they slit her neck as deep as they could. But even then, even with this fatal wound, Catherine kept on fighting. And she was so vicious that the killer actually had to brace themselves against a wall just to keep their balance. And in the chaos, the killer didn't realize, as they're fighting off Catherine, that they had placed a bloody hand on the wall, leaving a print behind. Finally, when Catherine fell to the floor, the killer was still blinded with their rage, and they just got down there and began stabbing her over and over again. And then finally, when Catherine stopped moving, the killer just jumped up and ran out of the apartment. But when they got into the hallway, they realized that black dog that had barked at them had gotten out. Now, the killer wanted the dog back in the apartment, but the dog was clearly on edge. They were still barking at the killer. And so instead, the killer just shut the apartment door, trapping the dog in the hallway, and then the killer fled the apartment building out the back door, where there was no security camera. And for weeks, the killer was not caught, until their violent past came back to bite them. Several weeks after Catherine's murder, a young woman who didn't know Catherine was walking down the streets of New York when she noticed a newspaper. And on the cover of this newspaper was plastered the face of the killer, who was currently a suspect in a murder case. And this woman was horrified because she knew this person. They, the killer, had sexually assaulted her about a year earlier, but she had never filed a police report. But after seeing that this horrible person was being actively accused of murder, she called the NYPD and she told them what she knew. And the NYPD's Special Victims Unit used this woman's accusation as the basis to arrest the killer. And finally, once they were under arrest, Getz was able to get their handprint. And those prints did in fact match the bloody handprint found on Catherine's wall. They belonged to Catherine's on-again, off-again boyfriend, Paul Cortez. David's suspicions of Paul had been right all along. Paul was a creep who had assaulted at least one other woman before he killed Catherine. Data collected from nearby cell towers would prove that Paul was near Catherine's apartment building immediately before her murder, and he had been calling her over and over again. When she ignored his calls, Paul waited until he saw David leave the apartment to go get his car, and then he hustled upstairs to the apartment, knowing Catherine would be alone. Even though David was only gone for 20 minutes, that was still long enough for Paul to get inside the apartment, murder Catherine, and slip away unnoticed. Paul was arrested about a month after Catherine's murder on Wednesday, December 23, 2005. He was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years to life.
I took a job reviewing deleted 911 calls, and one of them was not supposed to exist. They told me that I would be reviewing flagged audio calls, basically listening to recordings that had been removed from public record, just kind of marking if they had been corrupted, incomplete, or if they needed to be archived. It sounded boring, but pretty easy money. On the third night that I was on the job, I noticed everything was normal. All of them were labeled with like the case numbers, the dates, names, that kind of a thing. There was one file that specifically stood out, and it was labeled "Do Not Process." Obviously, curiosity got the best of me, and I started to listen to it. And at first it was silence, and then a woman's voice came on. It was very calm and controlled. She said, "I'd like to report something, but I don't know that you can help me." The operator sounded pretty confused and asked her what she was talking about, and the woman hesitated, and then she went on to say something that made me pause the recording for a minute. She gave an address. I recognized it immediately. It was about 15 minutes from where I am. And she got really quiet and she said, "There are people here that aren't supposed to be here." The operator asked if she meant like intruders, and she said, "No, these are people who have been recorded missing already." There was a long pause, and then there was another voice. It was in the background of the recording, and it was a man, and he whispered something. And then the woman went silent for a minute, and then the line cuts. I sat there trying to process what I just listened to, and then I went back to go look at the details again, look at like the case number. There was still not one. I couldn't find any other details other than an address. And then I did something that I probably shouldn't have done, and I searched the address. What I found didn't quite make sense. It was a location that hadn't been used for about 8 years. It had been abandoned. Before that, it was tied to a lot of missing person files, all unresolved. I went back to the recording, and it was gone. It was like completely removed from the system, like I didn't just listen to it. So the next day I went and asked my supervisor about it, and he just kind of looked at me and he said, "If you ever see a file like that, especially one that says 'Do not process,' you do not open them, you don't click them." I asked what he meant by files like that, and he just looked at me and he said, "Ones that are not supposed to be heard." The next day I came into work, and my access was revoked, and my contract was terminated early. But this is the part that bothers me the most. I was doing a little bit of research on my phone, scrolling, and I found some articles, and they had the same address, and it was recent, and it had been neighbors calling to say that they heard noise complaints coming from that address. They said that they heard multiple voices in that building when that building is supposed to be vacant.
Can't imagine anything worse than being eaten alive by the dogs you were hired to care for. On November 21st, 2025, dispatchers in Texas received a frantic call from a woman who was visiting her boyfriend's house when she noticed the dogs at the neighbor's house barking viciously. When she peeked through a hole in the fence, she was shocked to see a person lying face down in the grass being mauled by a group of 3 dogs. The dogs belonged to a family who had hired 23-year-old Madison Hull as a dog sitter while they were on vacation. After receiving the 911 call, police rushed to the home where they found Madison lying unconscious in the backyard as the 3 dogs took chunks from her body. In a heroic attempt to get the dogs away from Madison so that medical could reach her, one of the officers slides through the gate to distract them, but one of the dogs immediately starts to charge at the officer, who has no other option than to fire at it. But doing so scared the other 2 dogs back inside the house, where police were now able to secure them so that Madison could get help. Because police don't know the backstory about who the dogs belong to, and they don't know that the family is on vacation, they start asking the neighbors for more information. And that's when they have the sinking realization that a baby is supposed to live in that house. So now they're worried that they've just locked a helpless baby inside with these vicious dogs. But while inside searching for the baby, the homeowners begin talking to the officers through their security system, letting them know that they're all out of state, including, thankfully, the baby. When Madison is finally able to be rescued, first responders are horrified by her condition, and her injuries are so bad that she's sadly pronounced dead at the scene. The dog's owner said that Madison had been babysitting their children for the past few months and had been alone with their children and 3 dogs before. She even had a picture of her cuddling one of the dogs. Now, it's not really clear what caused the dogs to turn on Madison. Police at the scene were speculating that after talking to the neighbors and knowing the dog's history, it's possible that the group of dogs began fighting over food and Madison tried to break it up. Madison Hull was just 6 months away from earning her bachelor's degree in early childhood education. After an investigation, the owners were cleared of all charges.
I need to tell you guys this ghost story. This story was sent into my email, and if you have any ghost stories, paranormal experiences, or scary stories that you'd like to share, you can send them to the email in my bio. I don't really know if what I experienced was something paranormal, or if my entire family just happened to share the same series of coincidences. But what I do know is this: we should have never lived in that house. We moved into it in 2002. It was a small farming town in South Africa, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and where people don't really talk about the things that happened behind closed doors, especially not in houses like ours, because ours had a history, a long one. Locals used to say that the house was about 200 years old, and over time, bits and pieces of its past started surfacing. We found out that in the 1970s, 2 brothers who were working on the house as builders got into a fight, and one of them was killed with a hammer. Before that, back in the 1950s, a woman had told her family that her boyfriend used to stay in that house. He had died in a motorcycle accident in town, but she always believed his spirit never really left. And those were just the stories people admitted out loud. There were always others whispered about, things that you weren't supposed to repeat. My room was right in the middle of the house, surrounded by hallways on both sides. It always felt off, like there was no real safe direction you could face when you were in there. But I was a kid, and kids adapt, even when something feels wrong. My mom was a big horror movie fan, so from a very young age, I was exposed to all kinds of scary stories, but I never really liked them. They stuck with me too easily. I would scare myself more than anything else. And growing up in that town, people loved to talk. They joked that our house was haunted. I never knew if they were serious, until I was about 9. It was the middle of the night. I woke up suddenly for no reason at all. At first, everything looked normal. My room was quiet and still, just the faint shape of furniture in the dark. But then I saw her, a woman, standing inside my room. She was wearing a long, white nightgown, old-fashioned, almost like something from another century. Her hair was black and long, and it looked wet, like she had stepped out of water. And she wasn't looking at me. She was pacing, slowly, back and forth, like she was waiting for something. I remember lying there completely frozen, not screaming, not moving, just watching her like my body had forgotten how to react. And then, just as suddenly as I had noticed her, I blinked, and she was gone. The next morning, I told my mom. I didn't expect much from it. I thought she'd dismiss it as a dream or sleep paralysis or just my imagination, but she didn't. She told our housekeeper. And that's when things got even stranger. Our housekeeper was deeply spiritual. Superstitious in a way that wasn't casual, it was lived in. She believed in ancestors and warnings and things you don't question. She even used to insist we place bricks under our beds so they were slightly elevated, so something called the tokoloshi wouldn't be able to reach us properly. It was just part of how she saw the world. And when she heard what I saw, she didn't laugh. She didn't hesitate. She said it was an ancestor, something trying to make contact. But she warned me very firmly, don't interact with it. Don't acknowledge it. Pretend it isn't there. And she told my parents we needed to start going to church more regularly, to keep a Bible nearby, to keep things protected. At this time, I tried to forget about it. Years passed and life moved on until I was older, about 7 years later, when my boyfriend moved in with me. We stayed in a separate outside room on the property. It used to be for housing workers back in the late 1800s, and from the moment we moved in there, I felt it. That same feeling I had as a child, like I was being watched. At first, I didn't say anything, but then things started happening. At night, I would see it. Not clearly at first, just movement. Dark shapes in the corners of my vision. Then came the red eyes. Faint at first, like embers in smoke. I never felt comfortable alone in that room. Ever. My boyfriend, now my husband, was studying to become a pastor at the time, and he was very grounded, very logical in his own way. But even he started experiencing things. Sleep paralysis. Waking up unable to move. Feeling like something was sitting on his chest, something heavy, something present. Not just present. Aware. Inside the main house, things weren't any better. My mom would be sitting alone on the couch during the day and catch movement out of the corner of her eye, a shadow in the hallway. At first she thought it was our big black boxer dog slipping inside without her noticing, but when she turned to look, there was nothing there. No dog, no person, just an empty hallway. My dad had his own experiences too. He was home alone working in the bathroom. The door faced directly into the hallway, and he saw something move. A shadow passing under the bathroom door, slowly. Like someone was walking right past him, just on the other side. But when he opened the door, there was no one. No footsteps, no sound, nothing. And after a while, we stopped talking about it as much. Not because it stopped happening, but because it didn't help to talk about it. Because no matter how many explanations we tried to come up with, none of them ever fully fit. And to this day, I still think about that house. Not just the things we saw, but the feeling. Like we were never alone in it. Like something had already been there long before we arrived, and it never really left.
We listen, we don't get scared, and we don't judge. Let me tell you guys a story time of when this particular family got robbed at night. Well, everybody was in the house and they took everything, even the beds they were sleeping on. Around this time, I was in grade 5, and then a friend of mine invited me to a sleepover. She was in the same class as me, and she invited two of our other classmates for a sleepover, and we went there, and it was a jewel. So it was a Saturday going on to Sunday, right? And her whole family was there. The mom, the dad, and her 2 brothers were there, and then it was us. So they put the bed. The bed was standing up, if that makes sense. It was standing up, and then we had like sponges on the floor so that we had more space, and then like we could like have fun and all of that. Okay, cool. When I tell you, we fell asleep that day and we woke up and we were still sleeping on top of the sponges, but the bed was not there. The clothes inside the wardrobe was like, it looked like somebody took them out and sieved through the clothes and wanted the most expensive clothes and left the ugly clothes, right? The clothes were on the floor. So we're thinking maybe her mom was doing laundry, but at the same time, where's the bed?
where are the other clothes? I mean, why is it that she took specific clothes? Because she had like a lot of branded clothing. So we're like, why did she only take that? Because her shoes were gone and my shoes were gone, because I had night techies on and my other friends had, I don't know, but it was brands and they were gone. So now we wake up and everybody's in the sitting room, right? And they are just shocked. And we also, it was crazy, guys. The couches were gone. The TV was gone. The soundbar was gone. The fridge was gone. It looked like they were moving out, but they left some things, if you get what I mean. So the police arrive. As we're leaving the room, you know, the police were there. We're just arriving, and I just seen that everything was gone. They explained to the police that like somebody took their things, but they don't understand how, because we were all there, and they woke up on the floor. They woke up on the floor, right? Because the people who were stealing their stuff took their beds as well. And they're like, they don't know who did it. They don't know how these people got in, because the keys are there. I get when the police start like doing their rounds to check what's going on, they realized that the butler from outside had been like, the screws on the butler had been removed, as well as, and then the door had been like broken, right? So that's how they obviously got in. But now the thing is, how did they do whatever they were doing without us hearing them? Because each and every room had no beds. Whatever was valuable in that room, they took. The phones, tablets, iPhones, laptops as well. They took everything, guys. It was shocking, because we were there and so the police officers were confused, because they were just like, this family's lying. They thought we were lying, right? They also even asked like, do we have insurances for this house, the clothes, the whatnot? And my friend's mom was like, no, we don't have insurances whatsoever. Like, we're not trying to scam anybody. Like, somebody robbed us and we did not hear them. So one of the police officers is like, listen, we are black people. You know, these people probably burned something or sprinkled muti so that you guys didn't wake up. But their muti is hella strong, because they stole everything, including your beds. And this guy was laughing, guys, because it was funny to him. And to us, we are shocked. Like, we still don't understand what happened. So now people are standing outside, they're looking, you know, they're confused. And then this man like asks like, what happened, what's happening, what's going on? And they tell the man like, hey, we got robbed, bruh. Like, we got robbed and they took everything, including the beds that we were sleeping on, and we were in the house. You know, what's crazy is the fact that we were in the house. And so this guy is like, yesterday I saw like a really big truck, like a moving truck. It looked like a moving truck here. And, you know, people were like leaving the house with your beds. And he's like, I saw the beds and I thought, oh, you guys are probably moving. You guys didn't want us to know. Like, it's at night even. You know, I couldn't call the community members, because what if you guys are really moving and I'm just being nosy? And we tell the guy, obviously the mom tells the guy that, no, we were actually getting robbed. And, you know, it was clear at this point that these people used traditional herbs to do what they did. Because how? In all honesty, in my heart of hearts, I was like, they took my techies, it's fine. But at least I have a bed to go home to. Because what was there? It looked like a vacant house. Some of the things were there, but otherwise they cleaned them out. And then obviously they went to a traditional healer to find out what happened, and they went to the traditional healer with all of us, because the traditional healer was like, all the people that had their shoes taken should come through, because he's going to use our feet to send a spell to the people that robbed the family, right? And obviously I was there, and it's clear as day that these people used muti or whatever, but the traditional healer was like, no, as much as these people used muti, these people were working with one of the family members. He's like, they didn't just do what they did on their own. Somebody from the family helped them. And now we were all, like the whole family was there, even the brothers, and we were there as well as friends. So we're just like, who could it have been? And the traditional healer looked straight at the second born, right? Because I told you he has two brothers. Looked at the second born and was like, tell your family members what you did. And he's like, what do you mean? I didn't do anything. He's like, I'm not going to tell them. You tell them what you did. And he was like, the nerve of you. I saw you coming in from the gate and I knew what you had done. My thing is, the traditional healer is saying this. He's like, my thing is, he didn't say it like this also. He's like, my thing is, you're coming in here knowing exactly what you did. Did you really think you were not going to get caught? And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't do anything. I don't know anything. He's like, tell your family what you did. And then eventually after like he fights and fights and fights, he eventually caves in and he tells the family what he did. And he's like, listen, And he also started lying. He's like, no, these guys, I met these guys and they threatened me. And the traditional healer was like, stop lying. No, tell the people. I want it to come from your mouth, not mine. Just tell the truth. They're not gonna do anything. I'm here. So now we're all looking at him like, guy, tell the truth. And he's like, no, these people, I know them. I'm cool with some of them. And they said that they needed a score. I owe them money. And he's like, okay, you owe them money for what? He's like, I owe them money. He didn't say. It's like, I owe them money, so I needed to pay them back. And so I told them that they can come to my house, but they were like, how are they gonna do it? So they gave me something to burn inside the house so that you guys fall asleep and don't hear a thing. And I'm like, yeah, man, before I slept, I could smell something. Like, I could smell something, and I thought maybe it's the family members, they're burning their things at night, I don't know. And I'm like, oh, that's what it was. So he's like, yeah, he burnt that thing, and that thing made everybody asleep, and you guys could not see or feel a thing. That's why they were able to steal the beds. And the traditional healer is like, okay, but what money do you owe them? He's like, it's just something that had happened in the street, la 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 la. And he's like, no, man, you need to tell the truth. At this point, you need to tell the truth. He's like, I owe them money because I was supposed to sell drugs for them, and I eventually got addicted to the drugs that they made me sell, and the drugs were like worth like 100 and something thousand, because it's like the rich drug, the expensive drugs, sorry. And the people decided to repay themselves, and they took even more, and there was nothing he could do because these people are dangerous criminals. As a parent, like, what do you say in this situation, guys? That your own child set you up. What do you say in this kind of situation? And the mom is like, but why didn't you tell us so that we can take you to the villages or whatever? And he's like, no, they were gonna harm you guys, so I needed to repay them back and whatever. Traditional healer is like, you know what, I can help you guys, but he needs to go in hiding or whatever. And then he went back to, I think, his villages in KZN or something, and then the traditional healer helped them. One of the guys that like robbed them went insane. The other two shot each other somehow. I think they got shot at a place. They died, obviously. And then I don't know about what happened to the other guys, but they never got their stuff back, because one of the guys that was robbing one of the guys that was also part of the robbing plan went back to his country. I think he lived in Zimbabwe or something, and he went back with all of those people's belongings, because isn't that the one went insane and the other ones got shot somewhere. So he took all of these things and took them back to his home country, and yeah, they never got their things back, but at least they got their revenge somehow. But yeah,
I don't know if I told you guys this story time already, but just in case I didn't, and for the ones that might have not seen it, if I did, I'm gonna retell it. A couple days ago, my brother, well, first off, let me start off by saying my brother that's younger than me, but the oldest of my two brothers, he always has seen things, heard things. Like, honestly, I feel like we all have a gift, but him, he can see things clear as day. Things always want to seem to attach itself to him, if you guys understand what I'm trying to say. So, like, he's always the one communicating in some type of way. It's late at night. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning. My brother decides that he's going to take a shower. But instead of him doing laundry before he got in the shower, he decided he was going to do the laundry while he was taking a shower. He got out the shower, didn't have anything to wear, and he hurried up and ran to put his underwears that he put in the washer before in the dryer. So as he's putting it in the dryer, he has to go downstairs in our basement, right? And y'all know how I did a little video about how I feel like a lot of children seen the hat man, the tall hat man. This was like after I posted that video. He went downstairs, put the clothes in the dryer, and we have like so much stuff in our basement. We have a cooler in our basement, we have a pool table, we have the washer, the dryer. My parents had like a little drinking station down there. There's only like 2 lights down there, and they're both on the same side of the basement. They're both right in front of like the washer and the dryer, so everywhere else is dark. As he turns around after he closes and starts the dryer, he's looking behind like the cooler area, And in that little corner, it's really, really freaking dark. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, we have this huge animatronic Chucky doll downstairs in the basement that be scaring me. Like, oh my God, every time I go in the basement, I get scared. So I'm thinking he was finna tell me a story about the Chucky doll. No. He said there was something tall and black just staring at him, like watching him put stuff in the dryer. Now, me personally, my like 10 years of living here, I have not seen anything in the basement. The only two people in this whole entire family that have seen stuff in the basement is my mom and my brother. And if you follow me, then you know those two people have the most stories, besides maybe my dad. But he said once he seen that, he started praying. Like, he got so scared that he just started praying in his head. He opened his eyes after he was done praying, and it was gone. Like I said, it was dark there, but he could see like that it was something standing there watching him. He just went upstairs after that, and that same night, for some reason, I could not sleep. I kept tossing and turning. I went to bed at like 9. Mind you, I said this happened at like 1, but I kept tossing and turning the whole entire night. And I remember he came in my room scared, telling me like what the hell he seen in the basement. I told him, just go to sleep in your room, because I cannot sleep right now, and I'm not trying to stay up all night thinking about that. Yeah, that's my little spooky, scary story time that I wanted y'all to hear. If you guys want to follow me. If you want to DM me with your story times so I can share them, I won't mind doing that.